Welcome to the Tenant Podcast. I'm Todd Pearson here with my friend, partner, known to many as quite possibly the most interesting man in the world, the one and only Wes Brown.
Todd, how you doing, my friend? Today is Halloween. As we're recording is Halloween. When you listen to this, Halloween will have done past. And hopefully you all survive the ghosts and goblins. But this is going to be a fun day. Yeah.
It is going to be fun. So yeah, you're right. It's Halloween. My house currently smells like fall. It smells of cooked apples and cinnamon because my wife is canning in the kitchen right now. And she's been on this mission for the last couple of weeks. And we're like an apple confectionery right now.
Nice.
It smells like love in my house right now, Wes Brown.
That's nice. I wish mine did. We'll just leave that alone. So my wife will be listening to this later. So
ours smells like spray paint and spray mount at the moment.
That's good too. I love that.
Either way, we could get high, right?
Yeah,
that's right.
We're cruising altitude.
Hey, I got out this last week, and I want to mention this real quick. And I just thought about it. I recently have seen two incredible shows. I want to give a shout out to Bill Thomason down at Bit Factory for his current show with Tadashi Hawakawa and Waku Waku. That show down there, if you like abstract art, you definitely need to go check that out. You've seen it as well. You were here a weekend or two ago.
And I did. And I bought a piece. And his stuff is absolutely amazing. So I have it hanging in my office in my day job and look at it every day. Yeah, love it.
So everybody needs to go to Big Factory and check that out. That show runs through the 11th of November. And then I was at Michael Warren Contemporary this Friday for the opening of Floyd D. Tonson's show there. And do yourself a favor and go check out that show because it really, truly is spectacular. And it was interesting to talk with Floyd and look at his art and saw a lot of great people that night as well. But yes, put that on your radar to go check out. And I think that runs through the end of November, but I don't have the specific date. So.
Yeah, I saw images of that from a couple Instagram posts, and the artwork is absolutely phenomenal and looked like a great crowd and looked like a lot of fun. I'm glad you went, Todd. Yeah,
it was fun to connect with all those people. And I met Paul Hamilton, that has the largest African art collection in the city of Denver. I don't know any more facts beyond that, but I've known about him for a while. Might be the largest collection in the state of Colorado, I imagine. Anyway, let's talk some art.
Let's do it.
Thank you for joining us. Remember, you can always find out what we're up to via our social media on Instagram at Tenant Podcast and our Tenant Podcast Facebook page. And of course, our website, tenantpodcast.com. This week, you get two for the price of one. Our guests this week are Heather Link-Bergman and Peter Miles Bergman, both artists and members of the Institute of Sociometry. Heather is a conceptual artist, printer, and publisher, and the director of intelligence of the Institute of Sociometry. And Peter Miles Bergman is also a conceptual artist, publisher, and printer, and the founder and special agent in charge of the Institute of Sociometry. He's also an associate professor of art at Metropolitan State University of Denver. Both have been collected and exhibited nationally. And today we're joined by Heather and Peter to talk a little bit about the Institute of Sociometry and an event that happens next week in Denver called the IS Fair 2020-2021, curated by both Heather and Peter and our friend Haley Richardson, director at the Q Collection. So welcome, guys. Thank you for taking time out of your Sunday to talk with us.
Hey.
Thanks for having us.
Appreciate it.
I want to start off by making an observation and asking you a question. Let me know if I'm overstepping a little bit, okay?
Sure.
You two are both artists. You participate in a lot of the same activities and obviously share a lot of similar interests. You both seem like very attractive people. And you
for those on the radio who don't know,
they are very attractive people
going right now.
Yeah, right. Exactly. It's really coming through on the Zoom.
And you share some of the same last name. Have you ever considered marriage?
We have, in fact.
Yeah.
We did about 7 years ago.
Yeah. When we
Oh.
met and we're like, hey, we have the same last name. We should do this.
Yeah.
We should make it official.
Good for you guys. Good for thinking outside the box a little bit and doing the deed, tying the knot. So,
Well, thank God they're not siblings.
well, I kind of wondered if it was a Jack White, Meg White thing going on.
Yeah,
Like,
well,
are they?
Funny you should mention that.
Yeah, we've observed on multiple occasions that we're swimming in the same end of the gene pool. So, it's one of the reasons we haven't reproduced. We just don't want a blue child, So,
So you both hyphenated your last name.
well, no, Heather did. I did. Miles is my middle name, and that's
okay.
that's just to improve my SEO, so you don't confuse me for that handsome elder doctor on General Hospital, who's also Peter Bergman, the actor.
Oh, okay.
Or the
I
Danish.
thought you were him. I thought you were him.
If you go to peterbergman.com, it's a disturbingly disused baby blog from some Danish baby.
Nice.
In 2004 that only made it 5 months before it either passed away or the parents quit updating it.
We'll hope for the latter. Latter.
Yeah.
Like, I'm bored with my kid. We're not going to post anymore.
Yeah. Right.
Oh my God. This just got weird and I love it.
I think it'll keep going down that road, actually.
Nice. Well, everybody that's listened to us knows I like going down weird stuff. So
Yeah.
you're right at home.
And it's Halloween, right? So
It is.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you both live here in Denver.
Yep.
Are you originally from Denver?
No, I'm not. So I moved around a lot as a kid. I always like to joke that I've lived in every, distinct region of the US besides the West Coast. So, my family's from the East Coast. I was born in New Jersey. It's a deep, dark secret that's now become public because I said that on a podcast. But I also lived in New Orleans. And then I went to school in Chicago, lived there for a number of years, and then met Pete, and he convinced me to move out west. So here I am. So it's just California or bust at this point.
Nice.
Yeah, I was raised in the cultural mecca of Laramie, Wyoming. Some ties to Denver because we used to have to take the covered wagon down here to buy shoes and stuff like that. Went to high school in Ridgecrest, California, and the California part of that's pretty misleading because Ridgecrest is about 50 miles from Nevada. It's near Death Valley. But I've lived in Denver for a long time. I think I moved here in 1997. I was actually moving from San Diego to Williamsburg in Brooklyn with my girlfriend, but we broke up in Denver. So I ended up stranded here for what would it be, like 30 years, almost 25 years. I did spend 23 months of hard time in Chicago going to grad school.
That's where we met.
I met Heather there. We had a class together. We never hung out aside from in class. We actually, if you'll indulge the kind of like meet cute. As a professor, I had to develop a professional practices class for designers. This is something I know very little about because my own career path is so weird and unconventional. So I sent out messages to every design and advertising professional. I had my Rolodex by email and Facebook. It's probably about 60 people. And I got 2 responses. One of them was tell them to change their major. And the second was sincere. And it went on for paragraphs and paragraphs and had correct grammar and punctuation and breaks between the paragraphs. And I thought, well, my whole class is just this Facebook message. I'm just going to part it out into the syllabus. And that was from Heather. And I was like, by the way, what else you been doing over the last, 3-4 years since school?
Yeah.
And 8 months later, we were packing up her U-Haul in Chicago to move here. So
yeah, and I said to him, the whole reason why that happened is I just, I'm a big kind of planner. I'm like pretty meticulous in how I work and just live my life. And I really liked how you asked me out for a date like 6 months before coming to Chicago. I was like, that's someone who
Yeah, got to get it locked
He's
down.
really got it together. So.
Get it locked down. Oh, that's hilarious.
Heather, you mentioned that you're a planner and you're very meticulous.
Yes.
And Peter, planner, meticulous as well. I mean, obviously you planned out as far as asking her out, but
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'd say so. I mean, most of my projects that end up under the IS, standing for Institute of Sociometry kind of milieu, are long term. A lot of them, I think probably on the short end, maybe 5-6 months to execute, but on the long end, I mean, I've got another project that's not really part of the IS group, but I worked on that for 23 years. So I keep things simmering for a long time. And oftentimes it's not really necessarily a planned process. It's more of a need for things to unfold over time and to kind of sit on them and ebb and flow in terms of getting involved with it, and then letting it kind of fall by the wayside for a long time to kind of like ruminate or wait for time to pass. So if not being a planner, I'm someone who really like sticks to things over a long period of time and revisits them over and over again before I kind of consider them done. But I'd say it's definitely something we have in common. There's a huge space for intuition in the work we do and in our lives, but I think we're both pretty meticulous and like to chart things out.
Well, I think you have to too. I mean, many artists can likely relate to this, but everybody has jobs and other responsibilities, and I think in order to make sure you're making space and time for art to happen, you have to be pretty intentional about that, and bust out a calendar and plan it out.
Do you have a set routine, both of you, as far as when you're allocating time for your regular, normal, everyday activities and when you're actually making and engaged with art?
Well, we've always, used the quip that, all the art making happens on nights and weekends, but, for me right now, I'm pretty regimented. So I'm currently in a low residency MFA program. And I'm working part-time and doing this fair and all kinds of things. So, I have certain days of the week that are dedicated to time in the studio versus time to read and write and work. But, that's just kind of the nature of what I'm doing right now. But Peter, you're probably a little different.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's really the same in that you gotta schedule things, like having a full-time job as a professor, you gotta work around that. But we actually both clock in all the time to what we're doing. So we maintain time cards. And like in the lead up to this IS fair, I've been clocking like 30 hours a week on art practice in addition to, teaching, which is full time. But I think a lot of my work, when it's in its kind of developmental phase, I think of it like a plant. Like it's kind of doing its own thing and it just needs to be watered, a couple times a week. So I tend to engage with spaces or phenomena or groups of people that are kind of in an environment, and going by and checking on that a couple times a week, or taking an action or instigating something so that the narrative keeps perpetuating. And then that, leads to some kind of production phase where all that's pulled together into some kind of like usually written narrative with photographs and put into a book or a zine. At that point, although that phenomena or that kind of story that's happening out in the world might keep going, it's reached a little bit of an endpoint for me. And then, exhibiting stuff or having an event coming up like the IS Fair, that tends to pull together a lot of these dangling threads, and you start braiding them together into something more coherent. And those are times too when we tend to work more together. We've been working a lot together over the last couple of years. We call ourselves artners, like apostrophe artner, kind of in a wink at Alfred Jerry's Pataphysics with the apostrophe in front, because a lot of what we do is kind of in the, at least with the Institute of Sociometry, is in the kind of like pseudo social science realm, just like pataphysics. But with an event like this coming up, we we go in all together. We work really well together. We both have a pretty diverse skill set that kind of ranges from conceptual art to design and communications. So we each have our own individual work that we would put into something like this, but we have collaborations, and then we're kind of collaborating on creating kind of like event collateral. We're triangulating that with Haley in terms of curation and like administrative stuff. Yeah, I mean, you got to set aside time for it. You have to make time for it, you know, because it's not something that can just happen. I often impart this little bit of, I call it a demotivational speech to my students, where when you're a creative person, you think that in order to make creative work, you need that perfect, you know, Sunday afternoon when it's nice outside, but not so nice you're distracted, and you have a nice warm cup of coffee and you're in your studio and there's no interruptions from telephone calls or emails, and you have 5 hours of uninterrupted work time. And that space in an adult life doesn't exist at all. Like you have to make work, you have to fight for time, and you have to make work in like 20-minute increments in between other things. And you have to figure out how to work it in with your job and your family, and you're kind of maintaining your house. So you have to
ideally you want to maintain a few friendships here and there.
Yeah, you know. Right. Especially ones that don't care when you disappear for months at a time. Right. But I find it to be really helpful to have an artist as a partner, both in the collaborative sense, but also in the sense of like understanding where you're coming from when you're a couple weeks out from a show.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. People often will remark like, gosh, I don't know how you could work with your partner. I could never work with my, you know, boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, partner, whatever. And, you know, to Pete's point, I'm not really sure. It would be much more challenging, I think, to be an artist without someone who inherently understands the need to like go off the grid for like a day, or, you know, I need to spend 5 hours doing this, like to someone else's eyes, silly, repetitive tasks. It's like crucial to my piece. And I think what's really great about, you know, the way we're able to work together is just this kind of unquestioning acceptance of, well, you know, so of course you need to do that, you know, like, of course. So it's really helpful.
Yeah. And we're also both very collaborative by nature. Most of my work is collaborative. I sometimes have to make a point to work on something that's not collaborative, just to kind of see how that goes. Even in regard to the IS Fair coming up with Haley, you know, when someone's got an idea and they want to work on something, you know, it's just like, of course, do that. You know, there's no need to look over their shoulder. There's no need to have someone besides that person jump in unless they need help. You know, I think you have to implicitly trust the other people to understand what they're doing and be professional about it and get it done, and do it in a way that adds to the nature of the event. I guess it's relevant here to say that, you know, sociometry is the definition of it from a dictionary is it's the quantitative analysis of individuals and their relationship to groups. So it's kind of a disused social science where you would assign a numeric to someone's ability to relate to groups. And we've co-opted that, or essentially appropriated that term. And we call what we do guerrilla sociometry, right? So we get rid of the quantitative part and just make it a kind of subjective narrative experience. But fundamentally, it's about how an individual relates to groups. Mm-hmm. So in a situation like this, where we're getting ready for an event in which it's a bunch of individuals coming together into a group, it's kind of anything goes. You know, if someone has an idea, then that's part of the nature of the theme, right? Individuals relating to groups. And so it kind of makes it easy and fun at the same time, because it's kind of like you take all comers, and anybody who has something to throw in is de facto part of the theme. It's like an individual relating to the group. So in terms of our collaboration, or our collaboration with Haley, makes it really easy, because there's no wrong way to approach the collaboration.
So there's not necessarily anybody that's necessarily leading the charge. It's just whoever wants to jump in and take that part of it, that facet on. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, I think there is some organization to it. You know, when Haley, Peter, and I first got together to plot out, okay, how are we going to do this and accomplish the things that need to happen in order to make this a success? You know, we did divvy up, you know, leadership responsibilities in certain areas. So for example, you know, Haley's been incredible in sort of leading the public outreach part of it, you know, programming and, you know, has brought in, you know, a number of artists that we weren't familiar with who are just wonderful additions to the fair. So, you know, a lot of her experience with the DQ collection, she's been able to bring that. Whereas, you know, I've been only able to, I think, agree to doing specific discrete tasks just because of how many directions I'm being pulled in now. So, you know, I always do our collateral, you know, and produce work. And, you know, I'm usually pretty involved in laying out the actual exhibition space itself. You know, it's not always as easy as just putting a bunch of trifolds on a table, because every year someone gets cute and they're like, I'm going to make a deconstructed trifold that can only hang by, you know, 30-foot wires from a ceiling. And you have to kind of figure out how to make that work. So, you know, that's what I like. And I think, you know, Peter, you know, this is your 7th fair. So whether I think you acknowledge it or not, oftentimes, you know, you're sort of the elder or the keeper of the.
I'm the keeper of the old ways. Yeah, and we should say, you know, we glossed over the part that these are quadrennial fairs, so every 4 years. So this started in 1996, and they're typically on the same schedule as the U.S. presidential elections, leap year, the Summer Olympics. So we're part of that whole, you know, quadrennial cycle in this really bizarre, somewhat insignificant way in regard to those other events. So yeah, 7th fair for me, you know, every 4 years. So that stretches back a long way. So I'm probably the institutional knowledge. Mm-hmm. And for long stretches with the Institute of Sociometry, which is a kind of a, non-entity in the sense that nothing exists on paper. It's an idea, you know, or a website, or a loose federation of people who can use that name for their work as a nom de guerre. You know, I'm the glue, or have been the glue for long stretches of that. And that I'm the person who has maintained the mailing list, updated the website. And I think at any given time, there's probably about a dozen really active, we call them agents, but that changes over time. So it's not necessarily the same people, you know, from one fair to the next. Although we do have a good crew over the last, I'd say, 3 fairs of people who are interested in coming out for the event or submitting work. And also, I think at this point, we should probably clarify, you know, it's a fair, but for a fine art audience, this is probably about the farthest thing from an art fair that you could imagine in terms of like Art Basel being a fair. Where we're getting fair is really borrowing it from like science fairs. We call this a pseudo social science fair for free thinking adults. Mm-hmm. So the work by and large is submitted on freestanding displays and dioramas like you'd see in a science fair. And that format does a couple things. It lowers the bar quite a bit for people who are intimidated by the prospect of contributing work to an art show. So probably about a quarter to a third at any given fair of the participants are not artists or don't self-identify as artists. And it kind of lowers the highbrow factor for an audience. We really like it if people come in and look at the work and don't ever think of it as an art show. Like if that never crosses their mind. And I think that allows people to kind of engage with the content on a different level. Because a lot of this is issue-driven, message-based, some of it's political. It's really about something. We don't tend to have a lot of work that's abstract or oriented around form only, although a couple times that has been the case. But typically it's stuff that has a lot of text content. It's about something that the artist, or, you know, as the case may be, non-artist wants to talk about or is passionate about. And I think when you call things art, people bring presuppositions into that, and they spend a lot of time negotiating what they think art is or isn't, as opposed to just engaging with whatever the message is of the work. And, we want it to be casual, and we want it to have a really wide spectrum where, we've had fairs in the past where we've had a Guggenheim fellow, and then we've also had my mom, who's a retired computer scientist.
Or like a 7-year-old kid who brought in a Lego diorama. So
right.
that was like the 2016 fair.
Right. Right. So it's all kind of presented in the same format. Not a lot of hierarchy to the displays, although we tend to go a little crazy and go large. Tell them the dimensions of your biggest display you've got going on.
Yeah, I mean, this year I have a monolith trifold. So there's 3 8-foot by 4-foot panels, freestanding panels. So that's going to be, I think that's probably the biggest I've ever gone, or anybody's ever gone. But your history is actually starting. So Pete has a piece that he's added to now over the last 7 fairs that's grown. That's got to be 12 feet wide now at this point, right?
Yeah, it's like I have a collage that I make out of basically the foundation of it is all the mail I've sent or received since the 90s. Not all, but, representative samples of art mail. And over the last 3 fairs, so going back to 2012 in San Francisco and 2016 in LA, the foundation of those wings of this giant collage, which is, probably it's about 10 feet tall, 15 feet wide at this point, are all the returned invitations to the fair from all the people who have moved and not updated their address. So, a mailing list of 700 people, you're going to get about, 60 to 70 cards back, and they always look amazing, with that return to sender yellow label. And so kind of grid those out. And then on top of that, build it up with some of the more interesting mail art I've received over the previous 4 years. And then, on the other end, like Barkiel, who's Michael Bernhardt and
Barry
Whitaker, a duo. Michael's one of my colleagues at MSU Denver, and Barry's an artist and professor in Ohio. And they're a duo. They're artners as well, though not romantically in the way Heather and I are. They're making a comically small display. So I think it's like, something like 5.5 inches tall and like 8 inches wide. And they're trying to pack as much information onto it as they possibly can. And it comes with a zine also.
See, this is what I mean. Layout's always a big project, right? How do you?
How do you curate? Fortunately for me, Heather and Haley are good at that. So I'm the type of person who just kind of shows up on the day and puts things wherever randomly, and they're like, no.
We'll give them a job to do to keep them out of our hair.
There you go. Yeah, I got a question. So let's talk about the founding of this whole project and who was involved. And then Peter, have you been involved from the very beginning, and how did this all come about?
Yeah. So the origin of the Institute kind of goes back to, we pegged 95 is when it started. It might have been gestating a little bit before that. So I was at university at the University of California, San Diego. And the department head at the time was Alan Capro. So Alan Capro is the person who coined the term happenings. So he was... he's a really intellectually driven conceptual artist from the 1950s and 60s primarily, who kind of brought contemporary performance art to the US, kind of in parallel with Joseph Beuys in Europe. So he's a seminal figure in contemporary art in regard to the concept of art as life and the symbiosis between those two things. And so he taught my introduction to visual arts sequence. And, the projects he would give would be things like ask someone what to do. And then without revealing what it is you're supposed to do, ask someone else how to do it. And so it was a real kind of mind bender for someone coming out of high school who's used to making hot looking Chiaroscuro drawings with like charcoal. And then, my primary influence at that time would probably be the other graduate students. So Some in particular would be Igor Vamos, who's also known as Mike Bonanno of the Yes Men, the kind of prank art duo. He was also responsible for the Barbie Liberation Organization, where they took talking GI Joes and talking Barbies and switched their voice boxes and repackaged them and reshelved them before Christmas with press releases. And that was like almost a early internet viral phenomena. Like Lisa Simpson got one for Christmas on The Simpsons. Like that's how far up the chain it went. And then other students, but also I did some independent studies with Eleanor Anton, who's also a very well-known, like MoMA collected early performance artist, who was also very invested in this idea of like art as life. But then in a broader sense, what was happening at that time, kind of nationally and internationally, was a big interest in temporary autonomous zones and culture jamming and media pranks and disinformation. So this is kind of like, the heady days of postmodernism before it all kind of crumbled into the stinking pile it is now with like post-Trump and disinformation and everyone having their own reality. But at the time, things like fake news was exciting. That's like what artists could do to like subvert the power structure. And so I got involved mostly through the mail. The internet existed, but barely, with other organizations and people who would work in big collaborative groups. So the Cacophony Society in San Francisco and Los Angeles was a big influence on me, and was pen pals with them. And they're responsible for creating things like the art car, which is kind of ubiquitous now. One of their members started Burning Man. They started this thing called the Zone Trip, which is like an art field trip. And then also Luther Blissett, which was a multiple use name of Italians, artists, writers, and anarchists, about 300 of them who would all use the name Luther Blissett. Luther Blissett was like a B-list soccer player for AC Milan, who was from England. So they just adopted his name and used his name for all their work. And some of their work would be things like convincing the media that they had an exhibition at the Venice Biennale of Luda, the painting chimp, but the whole thing would be like made up. Or they did a counterfeit Hakim Bey novel. So Hakim Bey being an influential writer at the time, kind of in the cyberpunk milieu or like anarchist texts. And they came out with a whole entire novel in his style that wasn't his, and he was someone who advocated those kind of activities. So they were kind of like twisting that. I got interested in starting something that could be like a group or a shared use name, a name multiple people could use to do work under. And at the time, my project I was doing for school was this was in San Diego, and I lived in La Jolla, which is kind of like the Tony part of San Diego. And I was going around every night, graffiti tagging my full name and social security number, like as cleanly and legibly as possible. And I had a little grant from the college to make a book about it. And I was like, books need to be published by somebody. I don't have a publisher, but I can't just put this out under my own name. That's too pedestrian. I need something official sounding. And so I got Institute of, and I remember sitting cross-legged on the carpet of the back room in the apartment, flipping through the dictionary. And I'd been taking a lot of sociology classes. So I was like, this is kind of like there's some sociological aspect to this type of work. And I hit on sociometry, and I was like, I've taken some upper division sociology classes, and I've never heard this word used once. So obviously this is free game. I can take this. Like no one's gonna complain about it. I'm not gonna get sued. It seems like kind of quack science because it's like assigning a number to how well Timmy relates to his baseball team. Something that's inherently from an artist's perspective, totally subjective, right? So Institute of Sociometry, and that's what I used to produce that book. And then shortly thereafter, it was like, well, we need agents, and what do those agents need? Well, they need a starter kit. So they need a certificate and a badge and like stickers. And it just became this outlet for producing kind of a bunch of swag. And then I remember being at a house party with a bunch of my friends, kind of a year into this. And my friend Genevieve de Guyand, just kind of out of the blue, non sequitur, was like, you know what we need? We need to have a science fair. Remember how fun science fairs were? Wouldn't that be cool? And I was like, oh, I'll set one up. These are the DIY days. So everything, it would never occur to you to like get permission from someone to do this. So I just kind of started looking for spaces. And one of the more active agents at the time, Ketov Molotov, Christoph Rittenauer, who had transplanted to San Diego from Las Vegas, he was like, I think we could have it at the place where I'm living. And I went downtown to check it out. He was living in this 6-story building downtown. The entire 6 stories was run by what he described as a cult. That's what he said. It's kind of a cult. So there was like this Swami guy, big, huge guy who had a Mercedes and bodyguards and a big top knot, and would wear like a big white diaper and a dirty V-neck t-shirt and flip-flops, owned this whole building. And they had a computer lab, a recording studio. They had a chroma key wall. And it was just like open for people to use, provided that you would sit through like a 30-minute seminar from the Swami, right? So
timeshare kind of.
Yeah,
exactly.
So that was perfect. We had the first fair in the chroma key wall, with the nice transitioned kind of blue walls and freestanding trifold displays. And we got work in from the people in our social circle. And we got some people I'd been corresponding with. I'd been corresponding with this artist, Jay Critchley, who was collecting used condoms through the mail in an effort to create a giant repository of them for AIDS awareness. He was in Provincetown, Rhode Island.
No, Massachusetts.
Massachusetts, sorry. Provincetown, that's right, Massachusetts. And I'd been pen pals with him. We had some like Andre the Giant Has a Posse stuff because I was pen pals with Shepard Fairey, who was going to school at RISD in Provincetown, or in Providence. I always get those two confused, Rhode Island. Kind of took off from there. And, some people stuck with it, like Jay, for instance, Jay Critchley, he's flying out for the Sociometry, actually flying in from a residency he's doing right now in Dublin, Ireland, flying out to do a performance. And he's got some work he's exhibiting. But, the quadrennial thing was because after the whole thing was said and done, I had a lot of help from friends, but there again, I was kind of the glue. And someone was like, this was great. I can't wait till next year. And the thought of doing it again the following year was just so crushing to me, because I was like, I'm not going to do this every bleeping year. Like, it's so much work for no money. There's like, you're not going to charge admission for something like this. You're not going to sell work, God forbid, because that's like so capitalist, it couldn't possibly kind of go down that road. It's like a temporary autonomous zone. It's like an anarchist thing. It's like a rave or a Burning Man type of thing, where everyone brings what they got and you all have a fest, and then, someone sweeps up at the end. And doing it the next year just seemed like daunting. So I was like, that, I'm not going to do this next year. How about 4 years? I'll do it 4 years from now. And, 3 years later, just kind of thought, let's do it again. And it just so happened it was on the same schedule as like the presidential election and the Olympics and leap year. And so it's like, that's perfect. And every 4 years, we've pulled it off until 2020, kind of put it out there to what we refer to as the Council of Elders, which are people like Jay, who have been involved for a long time. It's like, do you want to do this somehow? Do you want to do it online?
Everybody's like, absolutely not.
Yeah, absolutely not to the online.
Yeah.
There's this idea from Hakim Bey called immediatism, and it's all about the necessity of doing things face to face and person to person, and not having
mediation, right?
Not having mediation, right? And not seeking permission, not having a gallerist, not having a producer, not having a publisher involved. Just I made
permit,
this, I'm
yeah.
giving it to you, not having a permit. So we thought, the Olympics, they put off for a year. So that's our out, we do it on the same schedule as the Olympics. So we're going to wait. And thus the title, right? They usually have titles like 2016 was Emancipation. 2012 was Infocalypse, because that's when the Mayan calendar was ending, in 2012. So yeah, the title of this time, that's where we get the 2020, 2021, because Brian Dick, one of the artists who is typically involved, his suggestion was, why don't you have it in 2021, but just like say it's 2020? It's like, okay, got it. We'll do that. That's the winning suggestion.
Yeah. That's perfect.
Yeah. So I don't know if that Stimwinder gave you the background necessary, but
it's a great story, man.
Yeah, I love that.
I love how all this kind of came together. And I love when I see, I love that you're in it for the long haul and you continue to add, at least with your piece, you're adding to it all the time and you exhibit it each time out. But I love the thought behind it. And I'm glad that you guys didn't take it virtual last year, because it sounds like, in addition to the ideology behind it, it's really about connection to and an in-person experience. So I think that's, you pivoted well.
Yeah. And I think, Heather coming into this more in 2012.
No, actually, I would say probably 2007, right? So this was right before the year before the 2008 Chicago Fair. And so, as Kid and I mentioned, we both met in Chicago at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And, as is mentioned, we didn't really know each other very well, but, last day of school, he's like, well, let's stay in touch. Let me get your address. I'm going to send you some mail art. And I was planning on moving to London at that time. And I was like, well, I don't have an address. So I don't know, send it to my parents, whatever. And, kind of forgot about it, lost touch with Pete. Like a year later, my parents called me and they're just like, you got this like very odd package and I'm sorry, but we opened it because we're like, what is going on? And do you know a Peter Miles Bergman? He like just sent you a bunch of like fake plastic bouncy eyeballs. And I was, I'm like, oh yeah, that guy. So I would say that, my sociometric score for the 2008 fair was really quite low because, I didn't really relate to that group. But yeah, I didn't quite come into the picture until 2012 when we had the fair in San Francisco. And what's interesting, so at this point, the fair had been going on for several years and it evolved, right? So there's always been this DIY ethos and there's always been this core, small core group of people who've organized it. But, since I became involved in it over the years, we've upped the sophistication just a little bit, really more for, the participant experience than anything else. So at that point, we had started adding a video screening component. So that's something we're excited to offer this year. So we have the actual fair happening, the Globeville Rec Center or the EPICenter, but then we also have two evenings of film screenings at the Greene Bar across the street. And, I think in other fairs too have had like live music performance. So what's been kind of nice about this fair is that over the years it's expanded to include, other, I guess, types of artists, just kind of out there doing their thing, right? So, in LA, we had a theremin performance along with, actual kind of like rock bands playing and all that. Forget the point of where
I was going to ask you if coming into it about, halfway through the run with fresh eyes, what your take on the whole thing was like in 2012 and then in 2016.
Yeah, I mean, I was a little befuddled, but I was like, nonetheless, I was like, this is really odd. I like this, I want to be involved. And so my first project, at this point in time, I had been working and had kind of my own kind of conceptual art practice, but, Pete and I've always joked, like, I'm definitely more highbrow out of the two of us. I'm still inclined every once in a while to like make something you can hang on a wall that, maybe someone would be like, that looks nice. That's attractive.
She's really good at that too, actually. I'll just throw that out there.
Right. So, it took me, I think, a little while to kind of really, I think, embrace, I think eschewing like any kind of like formal concerns, right, in what you're producing. So my first project was, we had gone camping in Wyoming. It was this kind of like dispersed camping site. And, I was still pretty new to kind of the West. I had just moved here about a year before. And I was like, oh my God, like what is with all of these like shells? And it was like, as if someone had taken like all of the china out of like 10 different houses and had like completely shattered them across this campsite. I'm like, what is going on? Because I was like, why is this all here? It was like as if an alien dropped it. And as someone who grew up in Wyoming, he was like, immediately is like, no, dummy. Like someone was just like out here doing target practice, target shooting. And, it was that was kind of interesting to me though. I was like, well, I would have had no idea. I had no context to understand this. So, and I had this notion of, someone going to that site 100, 500 years later and doing some archaeological research and trying to understand like what's going on and like why is this culture so violent and obsessed with like shattering these things. So my first sociometry project was revealing the sportsman. So it was an archaeological study of this campsite. I took samples and packaged them up and wrote this kind of like report / catalog and made this interpretive kind of natural history museum display. So my experience with it was really kind of fun, but it also just was very thought provoking. So, after that, it, I think has really influenced the way I approach, many works, whether they end up in a trifold or not, and that there are all these questions, like life is full of questions. And, I think for me, I really like to think about things pretty deeply. If you think about something long enough, there's just all these kinds of strange things that cross your mind that, if you don't focus on them, you perhaps never even consider. And that's kind of how I approach the fair and my work for it. And yeah, it's been very cool.
Yeah, like a good example of that, like a kind of phenomena that's right in front of your face and you don't really think about it, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. And then you start thinking about how to engage with it, I think is really a good lead into one of our projects that we collaborated on for the current fair, which is MOM, or Men Observing Modesty. Mm-hmm. So yeah, explain what the phenomena is behind that.
Right. So, so I'm a runner and, naturally when you're out there, you immediately observe the phenomenon of, shirtless men, out on the trail. And, of course, like I'm out there running on equally hot days. That's not really an opportunity that's afforded to me if I want to continue to run in Wash Park. But it kind of like gets you thinking of, it's just sort of like, how am I able to not only like control myself, but like run by without, harassing this man or talking to him or like, requiring something from him. Like, is it like it made me think of just sort of the control that has to go into that.
Yeah, like you're not just out wolf whistling at these shirtless guys,
right? But
they're jogging around
even if I wanted to, but then I thought, like, no, that's really asking a lot of me, and I think that's also asking a lot of women. And MOM was formed with this kind of acknowledgement that I think men share a responsibility in, not only protecting themselves, but, really kind of, I think, protecting women, especially their mothers, from their more base urges, right? And that they really should cover up. And, obviously I'm being facetious for the listeners at home who are like starting to turn down the volume and be like, what am I listening to here? But yeah, it's like that kind of détournement that's I think really kind of fun and like shows up in a lot of the work that we do.
Yeah. So this is an example of like the creative process. Like you have these conversations with each other, or just like driving around in the car. Mm-hmm. And, in my observation from a kind of cis male perspective is men are not very self-conscious about their bodies in the way that women tend to be, because we don't have the kind of cultural enforcement mechanism of catalogs and television. I mean, that's not entirely true. You know, as a 49-year-old man, whenever I see like an actor on TV who's like a cop or a professional worker, and they have their shirt off, I'm like, okay, where in this show are they showing the 25 hours a week this guy's working out? Because I know that you don't look like that unless you're spending that amount of time, right? Because the body goes soft, right? But you see men out jogging who are not, I guess we could say, Armani models.
No. Yeah. I mean,
and you know, you have this thought of like, there's all this stuff going on all the time with like Take Back the Night, or like
slut walk,
or like there's always some shirtless woman who tackles a member of the European Parliament like on an annual basis, and it's like on the BBC. You know, and there was a woman in Longmont who was mowing her lawn without her shirt on every week, and she got a ticket, and she took it all the way up through the Colorado court system and won. So there's these issues about modesty and gender, right? Mm-hmm. And at the time we were riffing on this is like during kind of Trump-Pence presidency, and there's that whole thing with like Pence where he won't be in a room with a woman,
right,
alone, who's not his wife. So there's like fundamentalism. Also, ISIS is going on at the same time, and all the issues with fundamentalism and control of women's bodies.
Yeah, I mean, and I think too, if you like, the more at least I've worked on mom and kind of thought about, you know, what ultimately is the direction of this project, how it evolves. It's when you zoom out, it makes you wonder what even is modesty, right? So it can of course be expressed in dress and personal presentation, but to me it poses this really interesting question of, you know, what would the world be like if men, or not necessarily men as individuals, but men as this kind of monolithic, you know, cis het masculine vibe, like what would the world be like if they were more modest in presentation, behavior, the way that they interacted with the world? I mean, I think it would be obviously radically different. Mm-hmm. And it's ripe for a lot of exploration, and of course parody and fun too.
So all that's like the kind of conceptual thought process, and so far what it's manifested in is this kind of organization, Men Observing Modesty. The aesthetic of it is it's like Old English lowercase letters, MOM, so black letter, kind of harkening back to the Middle Ages, in a white circle that is like literally just a trace of the circle on the ISIS flag, black and white. And it's a progressive, sectarian,
secular, progressive, fundamentalist
order to promote modesty among men. And there's some rules if you are a pledge, right?
Right. Yep. So we do, men or male identifying members are identified as supplicants, female or female identifying members are identified as escorts, right? Because we are tasked, of course, with protecting the virtue and, physical safety of the supplicants.
Because the men can't go out on their own, and they certainly can't drive. So you need an escort if you're going to go to the park or, go jogging. But of course, if you go jogging, you're not going to go shirtless. In fact, you're going to wear one of our very handsome black long sleeve hooded mom shirts with gloves and socks. But also you want to maintain a kind of casual, masculine, feel. We don't want to emasculate these men. So you're welcome to just kind of dress as you normally do, and like maybe black breakaway warm-ups and black flip-flops, provided you're wearing your socks. And just to be COVID conscious and modest, cover your face with a buff. Whereas the escorts, a primary, I think, goal of the escorts is recruitment. So they have a slightly different aesthetic. So why don't you describe the escorts?
Yeah, well, so right now we have coordinated, cute but tasteful hot pink polo shirts with an embroidered mom logo. So, think about the, nice, perky, cheerful young women handing you like a free sports drink or, an energy bar when, you're kind of walking around downtown, just trying to do your thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I think for anybody who's interested in exploring the order, menobservingmodesty.org, we have, a ton of propaganda there available for anybody who's interested. Yeah.
So, our action that we took just to kind of generate just to test drive this, was we got a couple escorts and a few supplicants together in full dress. We went to Riverfront Park, right there, kind of the footbridge that connects like the area near REI to the park, and just kind of like staked out a spot on a hot summer day with the shirts and with some tracks, some little pamphlets that we had. And of course, the supplicants were back in the background under the shade of a tree because they don't need to be interacting or talking to any strangers. And then the escorts out front, and every time a shirtless guy would come by, it was like,
yeah, I mean, we just did outreach, right? The mission is to provide a shirt for a shirtless male, no questions asked, regardless of financial need, And what was really funny about this project and this kind of intervention, right, on that afternoon is, as with most of these things, 90% of the people walk by or just, when they see you, start to quicken their pace and turn their eyes anywhere but you, and are just like, not today. And then, you've got a couple people who are game and, like they start kind of hearing your pitch and they're just like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll take this thing. And they start kind of walking backwards away from you. But, and then of course you always have your one heckler, which, we did. So
yeah,
that's always fun.
We had a progressive guy heckling us who didn't understand that we also, despite being fundamentalists, we're also a secular progressive organization.
Right. But what was really interesting is, and this amazes me about this project anytime I post about it on social media, all of the women in my life, like immediately are just like, oh my God, like, yes, I get this. This is hilarious. This is amazing. And for me, that's one of the most interesting aspects of this project, is just, it really requires like very little explanation for them to immediately be like, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. Like, how about those three, I think it was 3, maybe 4 young women who came up. They were just walking by. They were in like athleisure gear.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So these women are walking by. They're like, hey, what's this all about? We give them the shtick. And immediately, without any prompting, they start kind of ad-libbing with us. Like they could have put on a polo shirt right there. And been able to conduct the outreach.
One, I mean, which we have this on video, so we've been able to watch it a couple more times. But like, I specifically remember one being like, oh yeah, like I really hate it at work when like the air conditioning is on too much and you can see like the man's nipples through their shirt. I find that really distracting. I have a hard time concentrating on my work tasks. And honestly, I think like he needs to do something about that. And maybe like we need to talk to HR.
Yeah.
So they were just right there, like in this kind of faux, serious, sarcastic parody mode, with no barrier to entry, like just immediately, like, after a 10-second explanation in that kind of, in the mom voice, immediately understood. But then, another good one was like that guy who was jogging, who had the accent. Like, I don't know if he was German.
Oh yeah, he was really sweet. No, he had like a Spanish accent.
Yeah, but he's a shirtless guy. He's like in great shape. He's probably 50, I would guess, 45, 50.
Looks pretty good. Yeah.
But looks great. He's like running by. It's like, hey, you want this shirt? And he's like, oh yes, thank you. But he's like jogging in place while he's talking to him. And he's like, oh yes, thank you very much. He like unfolds it, and they're like, because it's important to cover up. But he just kind of immediately went to the the UV angle of the whole thing. Like, oh yes, it's very important. The sun, it's like very hot. You want to cover up. And, but he was really like thankful for the shirt and like really gracious. And he took a pamphlet. So, back in the comfort of his house, you could kind of read that, consider maybe next time he goes out jogging, he could wear his mom shirt.
Yeah. What's also interesting, just kind of one last comment on this project too. So, we were out there doing this intervention, and this comes up pretty frequently, I think, in a lot of our projects in public spaces. When you put yourself out there, you're putting yourself out there to, literally anybody else who may actually happen to be sharing that space with you, right? So, I think a lot of artists think you have control over your audience, and you actually really don't. And so one thing that was interesting is we did give a number of shirts to, men who seem to kind of just be, down on their luck, or, to put it sort of mildly. And, that was a pretty thought-provoking moment for me as well, right? Is, sometimes when you do these projects, like, you got to remember the participants aren't the butt of the joke. Sometimes putting art in public space or creating an art project, it's going to take on a completely different meaning for certain audience members. And I think it's really imperative that you're just, open and available to that. Like, so for those people, it's just like, oh, you want a shirt? Yeah, have this shirt. And that's it. Right? Yeah.
There was a guy kind of off in the distance, I remember, who was shirtless. He had taken off his shirt. He had a shirt, but he'd taken it off. He's wearing like jeans, like ostrich skin boots, like an ostrich skin belt with a big buckle. And he's like completely sleeved and covered in like faded blue, kind of like stick and poke tattoos of ghoulish scenes. Well, the tend you type to get when you've been like in prison for a couple decades. And I was like, oh, go give a shirt to that guy. I'm kind of like out of character talking to my escorts, and they were kind of like, no, I'm not too sure I want to go talk to that guy. So I was like, okay, I'll do it, So I go up to him, and, part of the voice of mom, if you're a supplicant, is like, is other men are your brothers, So I'm like, hey, brother, would you like a free shirt? And he's like, yeah, I'll take a shirt. And he had a backpack with him. Seemed like he was, if not entirely unhoused, he was in between places. He had some kind of like, kind of sores on his face and arms, like that, he'd been roughed up or something. And this guy was ripped, like he was lean and mean looking. But very stylish with his belt and boots, And I gave him a shirt, and I just kind of like, how are things going today? And like, he kind of immediately segued into telling me how he had been killed and resurrected over a dozen times. And I don't remember the Spanish word, but it's a Spanish word for hitmen who were following him, And I just kind of listened to him for a while, and had despite the context of what he was saying, and recognizing that he was kind of living in a different paradigm than the rest of us, I had a normal conversation in the park with him, and he actually said like, hey, thanks for the shirt. We took a selfie together, and he's like, hey, I don't have conversations with people. Like, people don't talk to me. People don't come up to me and talk to me. And I really appreciate just having a rap session with you, and we had like a little fist bump, and, he actually put on the shirt and like walked off with the shirt. And so, I think that's to like what Heather was, speaking about, is that you kind of go out there with this kind of like satirical, funny, parody.
Like, you kind of got this agenda.
You get this agenda. You want to get some good photos. And then you end up having this kind of like very unexpected human interaction that maybe makes you think about what's really going on here. Like, why are we really doing this?
Right. Other issues and other contexts that you didn't even anticipate happens, and it skews everything again. Like, right. It opens up a whole other conversation in your head or with the other people that you're interacting with.
Yeah, exactly.
So like, maybe from the supplicant perspective, as a man, I'm not allowed to talk to other women. I need permission to kind of go out on my own, but I have a lot of freedom to talk to other men, And maybe that's part of modesty, is to just like take the time to go talk to other like people out there who are like male identifying, who seem like they don't really have a lot of social interaction, which is also obviously a recruitment tactic for, you know, any cult. So there's that overlap. Because I'm sure if I think I did actually give that guy my number, you know, and it's like if I had started texting with him, I mean, he and I'd probably be out today handing out mom swag, you know. But you know, it's not really truly about that, you know.
Yeah.
Or that's definitely over the line for me, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you present this at the IS Fair, you'll have that video that you shot as well?
No, we don't have the videos involved. We do have a QR code, you know, on the display where you can go to the website, which we may or may not get around to uploading those videos.
Oh,
to.
it's on the list.
But yeah, it's like a bit, in this case, this is one of the larger tabletop trifolds. It's probably 4 feet tall and probably 6 feet wide. It's got photography from a photo shoot we did, plus this event in the park, or not event, but just activation. You know, there's pictures of that guy I was just talking about, putting on the shirt. There's like the selfie we took together.
Yeah. We also have the interactive component for the fair is what we call the male abdominal modesty assessment, aka the MAMA, because we want to give anybody in the fair an opportunity to assess just how modest they are. And then of course it's an entree for us to provide tips and guidance on how to live a more modest lifestyle. So we do encourage all people attending the fair to take that and to consider their modesty.
Yeah. So those are all printed out on hot pink, 8.5 by 11 paper on a clipboard. So you can go ahead and take that survey and then take it away with you. There's also mom 2.25 inch mom pinbacks with a variety of slogans, sayings on them, like one for the men that just is a nice, tasteful design with a black circle with a white circle in it. And then in Old English lettering, it just says, "I need permission to speak," which is really helpful when you're out in public, people trying to engage with you, that just to let them know that without your escort around, you really can't speak. There's the tracks. The tracks are great because it's like we took these pictures we did from a photo shoot and we superimposed them on top of Thomas Kincaid paintings, because we really wanted that, like
what's the Jehovah's Witness publisher?
Yeah, the Jehovah's Witness kind of aesthetic, where they have these very idealized kind of background scenes. And we were like, what can we grab off the internet to give us that look? And we're like, how about Thomas Kincaid paintings? And fortunately for us, they use really high res pictures of all his paintings on his website, so it's really easy to right click on them and just download them and make something new and exciting from them. A couple of them, I think, still have the little Thomas Kincaid signature down in the lower right-hand corner. So
yeah. So I don't know if that makes it less likely for us to get sued or more. We'll find out.
I think it's fair use. I don't think anyone could confuse that with the original product.
So now we're talking about my favorite subject is art appropriation. And this is the third time we talked about Thomas Kincaid in our podcast series.
Yeah.
Wow.
He's like the dark side Bob Ross, I feel like. Because like Bob Ross is all about bringing the light and happiness, but like, didn't Thomas Kincaid, correct me if I'm wrong, but the word on the street is he died from a drug overdose.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he was literally the painter of light, but it sounds like he had a pretty dark life.
Yeah.
Doing lines of cocaine before you go paint.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I feel like, he and Bob Ross are kind of deploying some similar like techniques or aesthetics.
Yeah.
And approaching art from kind of a similar perspective in terms of subject matter, like motifs, right?
Mm-hmm. So what's your thoughts on appropriation? Do you think how far does fair use go?
Well, this is my high horse, so I'm like jumping right in. Sorry, Heather.
Please.
But I think anyone who poo-poos appropriation art needs to crack a art history book, because like what going back to what the 19 teens, like the Duchamps, the ready-mades. So like the bottle drying rack, I think was the first one. And that's wholly appropriated. I mean, there's no modification to it at all. It's just context. It's taking something out of one context and putting it into another, right? And I think in a postmodern and then like whatever we're in now, like meta-modern or beyond
post-information,
Tom Ford calls it post-human, which I really like, age. People don't make brand new things. We juxtapose things, we remix things. I mean, like the entirety of hip hop is predicated on appropriation and juxtaposition. That's like, aside from maybe a band like The Roots, which has musicians playing instruments in a traditional rock format, like a lot of it is samples, and I think that's a lot of collage art is predicated on that.
Yeah, I mean, this is something I've thought a lot about recently in some work that I've been producing this year is, I think we're living in a time where, the current kind of or impending climate catastrophe really necessitates artists thinking about this a little bit differently. And, in my mind, I think appropriation is not only appropriate, but perhaps even kind of like morally expedient and necessary. So part of the reason why we're in this pickle is because we are constantly producing more stuff at the exclusion of thinking about what we're going to be doing with the stuff that we already have. Is there an opportunity as artists to use materials that already exist or materials that have been discarded as, and judged as not being, worthy or relevant and for fine art making purposes? And then I think also too, this question around conservation, I'm sure there are people listening to this who are going to disagree with me, but I mean, I think it's a worthy debate to have of, does my art need to outlive me? Does it need to continue on for hundreds of years after I'm gone? Right. And can some other artist possibly use it or, reuse it or make it something of their own? I mean, certainly because I have these perspectives and have these thoughts and I'm in favor of appropriation. Out and out stealing, of course, not great. Maybe don't do that. But, I think most artists are pretty thoughtful and can articulate a difference between the two.
Yeah, it's a problem I run up against constantly teaching because students are so used to using the internet as their kind of clip art repository, which I think is okay, but, it has to come from an informed place. I feel like there's a big difference between using someone else's work in your own work in a space of ignorance versus saying like, I'm a pirate and I don't care and I'm taking this. I know it doesn't belong to me. Even that, where you're taking a kind of more conscious, though maybe anarchist perspective to the whole thing is valid, but being ignorant about it's not necessarily valid. I think a lot of people draw the line at things that are appropriated but heavily modified. So like Andy Warhol, Shepard Fairey, that turns people off. But then going a step further into like Richard Prince, where he's almost like wholly appropriating other people's work and just minimally modifying it. Like the example being like screen grabs of Instagram influencers in which he's just simply commented in the comment thread and then blowing those up as huge posters and selling them for gigabucks. A lot of people draw the line at that, but I think what they're not really kind of plugging into is that he's playing a game. He's pushing the boundaries as a conceptual move. I don't really like his work, but because I recognize he's playing a game, it makes me want to play that game with him. I've had some ideas in the past, like that are as yet unrealized, and these are free for anyone else to do. Here's a freebie for you out there. If anyone wants to take this on, I thought, what a great art project would be? Steal Richard Prince's identity, get his social security number, start opening bank accounts in his name, credit cards, and then, just use your credit that you build up under Richard Prince's name to buy a bunch of art from your friends. I feel like that would be a great kind of parry to his move, right?
Right.
And more recently, what I've wanted to do is, I haven't gotten around to this yet, but I think this is more realistic. Take those Instagram appropriations that he does. He always has one or two of them on his current Instagram feed and just start making NFTs out of them and selling them. So just screen grab his screen grab of somebody else and then, sell it. But I was thinking about plussing it up where because if you read the comments under those, he has thousands of comments, and oftentimes the people are just calling him a creep, and just hating on him. And I thought this would make a great little zine, where like a vertical flip kind of calendar fold zine, where it's just his image with all the comments underneath it. And you could make it into a really nice publication with like the NFT on a little SD card embedded in the cover, and sell them for whatever people bid it up to, I guess.
Yeah.
But I think that's kind of a good response to something like that. And I think on some level, that's what someone like that is inviting.
Well, I think he would, he may not like it, but at the same time, I think he would like, oh, I get it.
It'd be the type of thing where he'd love it and his gallerist would sue him.
I was going to say the gallerist.
Yeah, right.
This is stop immediately.
Yeah.
It's like when
or any collector, of course.
Yeah, it's like when the band Negative Land made that U2 parody with Casey Kasem kind of swearing a blue streak back in the 90s. And the band U2 loved it, but Island Records, sued Negative Land out of existence and threatened to kind of like quash anything and everything they did for all time. Right. So it's like the artists understand that kind of stuff, but who owns the artist, right? Who owns their publishing output? Who really controls the financing behind what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate the comment about this, because like I say, I'm always enamored with art appropriation and where the line is, and cultural appropriation. I just have, I don't know. I think it's fair game, and, to be canceled completely, like Kevin Hart or whatever. And, some of his comments, long time ago, well, that wasn't even cultural appropriation. That was just making comment about a culture. And I don't know. I just don't get it. And, I think, especially when it comes to comedy and art, I think anything goes, and you just need to don a thicker skin and move on.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely like the Dave Chappelle perspective, right? Or a lot of comedy takes that line, that its purpose sometimes is to be provocative. And then obviously the other side of it is, especially with cultural appropriation, is, I think it has to do with the idea of taking and making space. If you're engaged in cultural appropriation, then in some way you're taking space. There's a limited amount of space for cultural information. So if you're culturally appropriating, you're kind of taking space away from someone who can speak more authentically from that culture,
Right.
who hasn't had the same access as you, hasn't had the same education as, or the you being someone who's in the dominant culture.
Well, I also think there's another, aspect of this too that I've noticed is, while I agree with you that, there certainly shouldn't be restrictions on people wanting to, say something that may or may not be provocative, but when you play the role of the provocateur, I think you kind of have to take the heat. And that is one of the issues that I see more or less now, where, somebody puts something out there that's offensive to somebody, and, rather than anticipating that and, being able to kind of, work with what you've, put out in the world and the controversy that you've made. Oftentimes I've noticed that people just be like, oh, who, me? And, that's to me more offensive than the provocative word, frankly. It's that sort of attitude.
Yeah.
Like, you have to be responsible for the things that you make.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I think some of what we do borders on offensive to different people, not from a cultural appropriation sense, but like I do a lot of work around unhoused people, and sometimes have had those people call me out on things like, hey man, like you can't come around here and like use our images, like you're not part of this group, like you're just a tourist kind of. And I think you have to reflect on those lessons, and part of the process, back to something Todd was bringing up earlier, the real reason for something is revealed. It takes a different direction. And sometimes that other direction is you realize yourself that you have flaws, or you're being a creep, or you need to be more sensitive. And I think it's incumbent on you to make that the moral of that story, and I think that's when everybody can be more enlightened, right? As opposed to just a knee jerk, like, well, I can say whatever I want because First Amendment, and I'm a comedian, that's what comedians do. I think being more nuanced.
Well, right. I mean, because that's the thing. At the end of the day, we're not interested in being comedians. We're artists, right? So there are other things going on. I think your perspective on what art is or what versus what activism is, I think is germane to this. Yeah. I mean, as Peter said, like there have been projects too, where I've gotten into hot water where, after it's been made, people said, hey, have you ever really considered this? Or, pointing out the things that I miss. There's one project that I worked on about 4 years ago that had to do with, affordable housing and zoning and, all of that, which is, of course, if you live in Denver, is a really prescient issue. And, one thing about that project that was really important for me in my practice is, articulating the difference between art and activism. And, the way that I've come to understand it in my own work is that, activism and advocacy is really about, communicating very articulately an issue or position and, garnering as much support or momentum behind that particular issue. Whereas art, I think, really serves more to engender critical thinking and pose questions rather than answering them. Certainly the audience that's interacting with the work can, offer their own answers and come to their own conclusions. And I think that's what makes, this type of art, I think, really special, right? And different from advocacy. However, there are, of course, that there are artists that work differently and see it differently. But for me, I think that's a really kind of clear distinction as to how and why I work and why I think it's different.
Yeah, for sure. And I think same applies with like humor in art, which is something we're interested in quite a bit. The difference between, say, being a comedian and being an artist that uses humor is really similar, and that a comedian is making a fairly straightforward path to a punchline or a point to a story that kind of everybody understands in the same way, and they like it or they don't like it. They think it's funny or they don't think it's funny, or they find it offensive or they think it's the comedian's right to be offensive, right? But I think humor in art is much more opaque. It's often circumstantial. Like what's funny about it is the accumulation of circumstances with like more conceptual, lived experience based art. It's funny with something like Mom that we're just doing that in the first place. But, what you really get out of it is something that kind of takes a while to gestate on. Like, you can explain it really quickly and there's a punchline and someone laughs, but then it kind of develops over time, or at least that's the goal, where the issue becomes more complex. And it's like funny, but tragic at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, Pete and I have had many projects over the years that we'll like pitch to each other and be like, hey, I have this idea, or wouldn't this be funny? And some of them don't take off for kind of one of two reasons. One is it needs more time to cook. So, Pete talked about this at the beginning of the podcast where, sometimes the magic hasn't happened, right? Or the impetus for this thing to become, a work or to come into space hasn't occurred yet. But sometimes, it occurs to you like, this is sort of like a 1-2 punch. It's like a one-liner joke. It really can't go anywhere. And those are the things where, I think the both of us, as we've matured in our practice, have gotten better about, understanding that and, kind of resisting the impulse to go for the funny joke and to dig a little bit deeper.
Mm-hmm. It takes time to develop that, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, if you're being thoughtful and intelligent about it, and like all good art, whatever it may be, whatever medium, a lot of times you have to spend time with it. And the same thing with what you guys do. Like you said, sometimes you can get right to the punchline and people can just get it, but the end result really should be that it makes them stop and think on multiple levels, and it becomes funny on multiple levels, or it makes you think on multiple levels, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Well, and I think there's especially if you're trying to do satire or be funny, I equate it. There's big room funny and small room funny, and you can tell an off-color joke that works really well in a small group, but then you put it on a big group and it'll fail miserably. And I think you just got to know your audience. And going back, I said anything goes, but I think you have to act responsibly too. It's one thing to take, let's say, a cultural appropriation of an image into your artwork and be respectful of it and put it in terms that makes you think or whatever. And then there's the realm of just being insensitive and being cruel. And that's a totally, so there is a line. I guess when I say anything goes, it's obviously anything goes in my head as long as it fits within, but I'm hard to be offended,
Yeah, totally.
And maybe it's because I'm a, middle-aged white guy that I have all the power and it's hard to offend me. So I really struggle when especially like when we mentioned Dave Chappelle and the audience that was offended. It's just like, you got to listen to the whole message because you're missing his message and once again, the reason I think he can get away with it is because he's intelligent. He's let this idea cook and it works, obviously not for everybody. And I think that's fair too, because there's comedians out there that I don't get. There's art out there I don't get. And that's all right. I just move on. If I don't like it, I, look at it for what it is. And God knows through I've mentioned this before, through the journey of this podcast, I've changed my mind on a lot of different art that I originally would poo-poo. So, yeah,
for sure. I think, from my perspective, over time, spending a lot of time with young people, to me, I think what's been going on is kind of a cultural correction. With postmodernism, there was kind of like this drive towards a multiplicity of voices, and that was going to elevate voices that were kind of not typically heard from, right? But there's also a subjectivity to everything and a lack of a singular truth to everything. And you could kind of formulate your own reality, and that was valid. And I think the last probably 4 or 5 years has kind of driven that whole thing into the ditch, because you see where it goes ultimately. So you get I think of Trump as like the ultimate postmodern president, because he's like first and foremost an entertainer. He doesn't have a grounding in any kind of like shared truth. It's just about the message, what works, what gets the most clicks right now.
Well, it's also very ego driven. It's not even just about the message, but it's about, it's all about him and his own mind.
Yeah. And so you see kind of like the real dark side of that cultural movement, and young people who are kind of existing in a place well beyond that. Because, if like the height of postmodernism is like really in the 80s, it's well before they were even born. That's like their parents' time, right? And I think there's a big kind of cultural correction back towards some amount of like truth, or like respect for truth, or respect for like a shared vision or
community norms, right?
Yeah, exactly. Having community norms or standards. And there's a real tension, I think, between people who have grown up with the idea of like radical free speech, in which the ACLU is defending the KKK in court, versus today's cultural climate. And in fact, the ACLU just the other day came out with a new position statement where they're going to start drawing lines on what kind of speech they will defend. And I think it's all good and necessary. Right now it's like it might be the purges. It's like when they brought out the guillotine at the French Revolution, but like.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, for me, it's to kind of think of the ACLU and the example you bring. It's not really, the way I interpret that is it's not taking a position against certain types of speech, it's taking a position against cruelty, right? And
right, when violence that kind of the line, yeah.
So when you really dig past through it, and I think try to resist your own knee-jerk response of like, oh my gosh, like there is no such thing as free speech anymore. Like, well, that's maybe not necessarily true. I think what we are collectively trying to triangulate around is, is there actually really a space for this kind of violence or cruelty or just complete disregard for humanity?
Yeah.
Right.
I've got a good like art project anecdote, something's in the fair that I think speaks to this. And I was working on this morning, so it's kind of top of mind, but So for several years, and like to Todd's earlier point about things taking time to gestate, a lot of research goes into a lot of our projects. So for about 5 years, I've noticed this sign that's on a empty asphalt triangular lot in a kind of warehouse district over by Santa Fe and Alameda. And it says, no trespassing. And then it says, distribution of literature strictly prohibited by non-employees on premises, or something. It's not exact, but that's the gist of it. And then it says like violators will be prosecuted. And it's just right in the middle of this like empty asphalt lot with tumbleweeds blowing around. And it just struck me as like this non sequitur, because you picture some like liberal arts lady with like brushed out gray hair handing out D.H. Lawrence chapbooks on this like lot, like here's your literature, and then just get like dogpiled by the cops. It's just like funny, And I looked at this thing for years. I would walk by it. I was like, I got to do something with that, because it's on this armature with punch holes in it, like so you can bolt things to it. And there's like the sign and an electrical box and then a blank space. And I was like, that blank space is mine. I'm gonna do something with that. And so eventually I was like, I'm gonna put a little free library on that thing, distribute the literature, right? And I had that idea for probably about 2 years without ever doing it, right? And then last fall, I noticed they fenced that entire lot. And my first reaction was like, well, I guess I'm just never going to do that. To like Heather's point, some things just don't pan out, But then I noticed that on the fence were signs that said zoning change proposal. And I was like, oh, this lot's across the street from like a 200,000 foot empty warehouse. It's the old Sports Authority warehouse. And I was like, oh, they're going to demolish all this and make, luxury adult dorms, And then when the fence went up, as soon as the fence went up, people started camping against the fence and hanging tarps on it, using it as like a windbreak. And I was like, well, there's the audience for the little free library. That's like a community initiative. And so you need a community, right? Mm-hmm. And we started calling it Boomtown because it just grew and grew and grew until there was probably like, I don't know, at least 24 tents, maybe more.
I think more people too, kind of coming in and out of the area.
Right. And then I started going down there and just walking through, riding my bike through, checking it out, and just noticing what's going on. And there's a lot of like side product of the unhoused population. 30% of unhoused people have substance abuse issues. So there's like needles on the ground, it's kind of, it's not the type of place everyone goes to, but maybe they need to. Maybe a lot of people need to do a walkthrough, right? And so I was like, well, if I put the little free library, maybe that's a draw. And so instead of making it myself with my art skills, I actually spent $230 and I bought one from littlefreelibraries.org with the official nameplate on it, and registered it on the website so that when people in West Wash Park are looking for little free libraries to take their kids to, it's one of the options, But then I had this kind of late stroke thought where I was like, well, what do I put in there? Because the little free libraries are usually full of like dreck, it's like
LSAT test prep books, they're out of date, Danielle Steele.
Yeah, 50 Shades of Grey.
Da Vinci Code, just trash.
But this needs to be literature, literature, right? So I got a list from the American Library Association of banned and challenged classics, right? So books that have been banned could be in a state or municipality, it could be just in one school, right? So like, there's the kerfuffle in the news right now about Beloved by Toni Morrison and the Virginia governor's race. Mm-hmm. Right? Which anyone could Google because it's like very hot topic right now.
Yeah.
But I took this list down to Fahrenheit Books, and they had like, it was just like bing, 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 bing. Every single book on this list they've got. And I walk out of there with like a file box, like $150 worth of $7 paperbacks. And then, I was like, this is perfect for me because this is great for my message, right? I'm putting literature, true literature, because this is like Norman Mailer, on one end of the spectrum, to like Kurt Vonnegut on the other, like George Orwell, and it's hilarious. Like the joke's there, because it's like this, it's just this clever turn where it says no literature, and then there's literature, but it's banned literature, so it works, right? But then I was like, well, but what do these people want? It's like they probably will enjoy reading these books that are living there, but what do they need? Well, we had gone through and given out coats with change in the pockets over the winter, but it's like summer,
Right.
It's party time in Boomtown. So I went down to Walgreens and I was like, do you sell hypodermic needles? And they're like, yeah, 100 packs. So you can only buy hypodermic needles in 100 packs at Walgreens, $24. So that's a pretty high barrier for someone who's on the street because of IV drug use, right? And the purpose of a clean needle really is to keep someone from getting AIDS, HIV, Hep C, right? Using dirty needles. So I stocked it with these banned books, but also the needles, right? So I made a nice little cottagecore like ball jar that said like clean needles. But I knew from doing previous engagements with unhoused populations that I kind of needed to consult with people who really understand the issue to not be
Dumb about it. Yeah.
So I have a friend from college who her whole entire professional career is working with unhoused people. And I message her and I'm like, hey, what about this? Is this bad to give people paraphernalia? It's like, it's not legal, but is it unethical? And she said, if there's no place to put the dirty needle, that's like a one-way receptacle, then it's probably not a good idea because you're just putting more needles out on the street. So then I hooked up a lockbox with a slot for dirty needles, right? So this is the box, and I installed it, and I got to go and interact with it and restock it and check it, right? And like to do this, it's like you have to walk between two people's tents, duck through a hole that's been cut in the fence, walk around behind all these tents, kind of look in this, and like, the first day I went down there to check on it, I was wearing chacos, and I realized that was a bad idea because it's just like ground's littered with used needles. So, it's pretty abject for someone who doesn't live in that environment, right? And I'm checking the box and stocking it, and I hear behind me someone being like, "What's up with this guy?" Like that's what I heard. I hear like, "What's up with this guy? He's messing with that thing? Like, what is he doing?" He's like, "Are those needles?" And I kind of turn around, and there's a guy standing there. He's got his shirt off. He's got super dirty hands. He's got kind of like a cut on his face. I'm all, oh, hey, I'm just putting some books in here. I'm putting some needles in here. They're for anyone to take. They're free. It's just like my project. And he's like, okay, well, like there's a lot of people that come around here with like, some motives and like reporters, and they're taking our pictures. People don't ask permission. He's like right away, like kind of, hey, you can't just do whatever you want. People live here. This is like where people live. And so I was like, hey, can I finish this and come around and talk to you about this? Because I don't want to be standing back here. There's traffic going by. I'm standing in this fenced off area. I'm just like, I'm thinking like, I don't want to get the cops to roll up or, I've got all these needles. And he's like, you can do whatever you want to do, man. Like I'm not telling you what to do. So it's like, oh, okay, So I walk around, I walk right up to him, and he's kind of like flexing on me a little bit, like, who are you? What are you doing here? Who are you with? And I'm like, I'm not with anybody. I'm just an artist. This is like my project. I thought there might be need here for clean needles and maybe cool for people to read some books. I do come around, I take pictures, but I won't take pictures of any person unless they give me permission. And he's like, okay, yeah, well, do what you do, but like, you got to realize that like this is a private, we're out in public, but this is still a private space. This is where we live, and publicizing it's bad for us. The more word that gets out that we're here, the more likelihood they come through and sweep. And I was like, okay, point taken. And, I asked him what his name was. His name was Sketch, like fist bumped. And I was like, okay, are we cool? Like, do do you want to keep talking? Do you have time to keep talking? Do you feel like we're good? Am I good with my project? Because it's like, I have to be on the level with this guy, or else that thing's going to be gone. 20 minutes after I leave, they're going to be like, bleep this, and just smash it off of that thing, because it's like, this person's making fun of us, taking advantage of us, using us as characters in a story, which is kind of not cool, right? So I'm like, are we cool? And, and he's like, well, we'd be a lot cooler if you gave me money for drugs. And then we just kind of looked at each other for a second and just like both laughed, because it was really a joke, So I'm like, all right, man, I'll see you around. And I did. I saw him around. The rest of the summer, I'd see him around. But I feel like that's the kind of thing where you have interactions with people where you realize you kind of, out of ignorance, you've overstepped and you've offended someone. And that's the learning space for yourself as an artist, right? So part of why I'm doing this is creating some information so that other people who are in a more privileged space like myself can get a window into what it's like to be like a unhoused addict, right? That's like my primary audience. But then you start to realize that in doing so, you're kind of creating a caricature out of like a human situation. And when someone corrects you on it, you have to own that. And then that has to be part of what you're talking about, And then there's been projects in the past, especially when I was younger, where the end result of the project was like the realization that, man, that whole time I was a jerk, and that's what the moral of the story becomes. It's just like, I'm a jerk, don't be a jerk like me, But I think anytime you engage in like the lived experience as your art medium, you have to expect the unexpected and know that when the unexpected happens, that's a course correction. That's pointing you in the real direction that this project is going. And you have to be open to self-criticism. And I think that's exactly like what Heather was saying about owning your own insensitivities or your own mistakes and kind of like copying to them. And not just being like, well, I'm an artist, I can do whatever I want. It's like, I do agree that that's true, but, more importantly, you're a human and you should be conscious of being in a kinder space with other humans, not using them as a medium for your art. They are informing what you do and they're helping you with your project. And
right. They're collaborators in this.
Yeah, they're collaborators. And so you have to give them space to collaborate. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they get to have their say, or you should give them their say. And like you said, in this particular instance and one previous, to do it, due diligence, really, that part of the story has to become part of the narrative of the project as well, right?
Yeah, and not just part of it, probably highlighted within it. To point out that like this is one of the more important takeaways of this story.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, like the original idea and intention becomes like the one paragraph preamble before the real work or the real story starts happening.
Yeah, and that's the magic Heather was talking about.
Right.
You have a lead in, and then the true meaning is revealed. And I think back to like Wes talking about comedy. The type of comedians that appeal to me are like Andy Kaufman type of comedians, where they present one thing, but they're really doing something else. There's this whole kind of meta narrative happening behind the facade. And that meta narrative is something that is really more about life itself than about like a joke in the moment. And it's pointing out that like what's funny or magical about this is like human nature or the way we all behave or, the way we move through space. And like, I think that kind of stuff is really fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for me, it's funny this comes out. So I'm drinking my latte coffee in my Latte Larry's mug here. So, the kind of comedians I like, Larry David, one being that I just really uncomfortably relate to that show and that comedy because there's just countless things that annoy me. But, one of the things that I think is really kind of brilliant about that kind of comedy, and this is maybe a little Pollyannish, but whatever, is, I think comedy can function as a really high art form in showing us the way to be better people, right? There's really nothing that can, I think, gut you or kind of bring you to a level of like profound understanding the way like comedy can. And I think, it's those really important and like serious and sometimes comedic interrogations that, make us question, why we do the things that we do and, how we can be better and how we can better to other people, but also to ourselves. So again, I gave you fair warning. That was pretty Pollyannish, but comedy can be really brave in examining like, well, why am I kind of like a piece of shit? Like, what's this about?
Yeah. And, I think a lot of the IS stuff or the Institute of Sociometry stuff has an absurdist angle to it or a funny angle to it, at least the stuff that we are principally producing. Although I think that gets picked up on and definitely over time, that's kind of become an editorial direction of it is there's an absurdist or funny angle to a lot of the work. So it's presented as like kind of like simultaneously serious and amateurish because it's like a science fair kind of vibe. But then as soon as you start absorbing the information, if it's something like Mom, at first it seems like really serious, but the context kind of winks at you where it's like, this couldn't possibly be serious. And then once you kind of cross that threshold, you understand the kind of satire or the parody value of it. It becomes funny. And I think that's a big not driving force, but like direction in a lot of the work, because if you're talking about serious topics, humor can be disarming. When two people who have opposite views on something or different politics can both laugh about something on that topic, it's like an entry point to kind of thinking more broadly or to having more dialogue about it.
Yeah.
Even with this interaction with this gentleman that was kind of calling you out in this space, right? At the end, he said it would be much cooler if you gave him money for drugs, right? And you guys both laughed and you're like, that's beautiful, right?
Yeah.
That's perfect. That's a perfect way to walk away from this.
Yeah. Like 2 days later, I was actually waiting at a light underneath I-25 on Broadway. And I look over and there he is talking to someone. And I just like roll out my window. I'm like, hey, Sketch. And he just turns around and he's just like, kind of like, what's up? He probably didn't even recognize me, but he's like, yeah, that's me. I actually, in all those interactions, I got called out a second time, but in a kind of really more unnerving and sinister way. And that I got, at first I was kind of always sneaking in, like if I went by and there's a lot of activity, I would like come back later, because I just felt super self-conscious. But then I got desensitized to it and I just like and I got to know some of the people living there by name and they knew like, oh, he's the guy who puts the books and, and I remember walking through one day and there was a guy who kind of looked pretty clean cut for being out on that stretch of Bayard and he had a mask on, it's like not typical. And I walk up and he's kind of looking at me. And, trying to make eye contact. And I make eye contact. I give him a little like head nod, like just acknowledgement. Hey, how's it going? But I immediately duck through a hole in the fence and start walking back behind the row of tents. And like, I kind of look back and I see him watching me the whole time. And then I restock the little library and I leave, I duck out the fence and he's still watching me. And I'm like, how's it going? Just beeline back out of the neighborhood. I got my bike locked up on the corner. Unlock my bike. I'm getting on my bike. I'm riding away. Someone's coming the other way on a bike. This is like a kind of desolate area of Bayard by the railroad tracks. The guy rolls up on a bike. He's wearing all black. He's got black, like Loke style sunglasses. He's got a shaved head. He's got a little goatee. And he sees me and he just beelines right towards me. I'm unlocking my bike and he stops about 10 feet away from me. And I don't even know what he said to me because he was far away and I can't hear super great, but it was like, he was talking to me in this mix of like Spanglish and like drug jargon. And I'm just like, nah, I'm good. I'm all good. And he just kind of looks at me and he just says, don't be fucking around. And he's just looking at me, So, and I just kind of look at him like, I understand. Like, I got it. I got the message, And he's like, all right. And he turns around and went back the way he came from. And so I was like, what was that all about? And I realized the guy with the mask, he was like the spotter or the dealer. And he assumes, when you see like a kind of like long hair, kind of washed up hipster white guy walking into a homeless camp who's clearly not homeless, it's like, why are you there? What do you want? Well, 90% of the time, you want drugs, right? And I had observed people would it was like a drive-through. People would drive through, stop, roll down the window, someone walks up, talks to them, they drive, so that's going on, right? And I realized that like, the spotter just alerted security. The person who's putting the needles in the thing just showed, or, I don't know how much context they had, but like someone's here doing something that is acknowledging the fact that there's a drug trade, but they're not involved in it. So that's red flag, right? So the guy came rolled around to tell me wasn't welcome. You're not welcome here.
Get lost, right?
Yeah.
Get lost in a way where you're just like, okay, well, that's a message to be taken seriously.
Yeah.
So there again, it's like you're kind of like engaged in an aspect of culture that's outside your comfort zone. You had no window to up until that point, and you're being asked to engage in a way that you need to be showing respect to the person you're talking to, and I think that's really kind of interesting and enlightening.
Well, it's almost like an individual
relating to groups.
To bring it full circle.
Right.
There's definitely a fine line here, right? Where you take it maybe even just a little bit too far and you're actually fucking with people, right?
Oh, yeah.
And not in the instance that you were engaging with people, but somebody like Sacha Baron Cohen, right?
Yeah.
Where I can appreciate some of the humor. Sometimes it takes it too far, even for myself.
Yeah.
What is that fine line, right? Like, what do you think that's an individual thing, or is it part of the group thing? The part of
I think it's individual. Like we have a friend who's really involved in the group, Jim, who's all about taking it over the line.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of relates back to some of the issues that we're still trying to untangle with the Mom Project, right? So when we have these conversations, for me, the line is farther back, probably from some of the like Pete and Jim, right? Just because of, like physical safety concerns. And, there are certain things that, Pete's willing to do that I'm not, right? Or putting myself in certain situations that just would be like a little too uncomfortable for me. I mean, for me, the line is, I always ask myself this question: if I do am I comfortable being the butt of this joke? Right? Because at the end of the day, the only way that comedy works, and I think Sacha Baron Cohen's a really good example, like he's very much the butt of the joke, I think, oftentimes with his work. And for me, if I'm willing to take that, then, because ultimately that's really the person I'm making fun of. But if I'm unwilling to do that, then I'm like, well, then I'm unwilling to do this, right? Like, this is not a project or work that needs to be made by me, right? Mm-hmm. But I don't know about you, Pete. And Jim certainly is a whole other character.
Yeah, I've done projects where that I've collaborated with this guy, Jim Hansen, who's not an artist. He's a genius carpenter. So he's a member of Mensa, and he's kind of an itinerant carpenter, where he's latched onto something I've been doing and taken it way further than I was comfortable with. And I relegated myself to just documenting him and kind of being in the shadows and seeing where it went, because I wasn't comfortable kind of per se with what he was doing, but I felt like he had the autonomy to do it and the kind of like sophistication to understand what he was doing. And he was being intentional. But for me, I learned pretty early on when I was pretty young doing this kind of work that I think the line for me generally is not engaging with people who haven't put themselves out there, who aren't on the court, right? So not making just kind of regular civilians part of your project. Right. And I think that's why it was like really valid for Sketch to remind me of my own principles, because I was doing that with them. I was kind of othering them and not thinking of them as regular civilians because they were unhoused, right? But I'll give you an example of what that means. So there was a guy years ago who wrote a letter to the editor of the Westward after they had run a death penalty oriented story. Jim Keel in Aurora, Colorado. He writes a letter advocating for a 100-point criminal justice penalty system, in which you get a point for any infraction from like vehicular violation to murder. So he's like, you get a what normally would be like a 3-point speeding ticket. That's like a 1 point. Assault's like 10 points. Murder's like 90 points. And when you get to 100 points, you're put to death, right? So if you get 100 3-point traffic violations, they're going to execute you, right? And I am someone who, I'm anti death penalty, right? So I'm like, okay, well, this guy, he basically just served up, a ball in the game. He's put himself out there. He's written a letter to the editor. He's in a public forum, and he's wanting to engage in debate, right? But the way I debate is different. As an artist, like back to what Heather was talking about, I'm not going to come at this in a logical, like linear kind of fashion, right?
You're not going to write your own letter to the editor.
I'm not going to rebut his letter, right? So I found his address. There's only one Jim Keel in Aurora, and it's pretty easy to find an address. But then, I didn't know what to do. So I just sat on it for a long time. But what I did start doing was every time the death penalty was mentioned in the news in any context, and I read a lot of news, it's like a big hobby of mine. I would just I just print it out, put it in a file, or photocopy it if it's in a magazine. Mm-hmm. And so I amassed this just huge dossier of articles about the death penalty. Some are like pro, some are against, some are journalistic. It's like international, there's like the guy who got put to death in Saudi Arabia for joyriding. It's just like really deep. There's people who were put to death and then exonerated later. There's people who put to death who were like just committed horrific, brutal crimes against defenseless people. It's just the whole spectrum. And then about 2 years after he wrote his letter to the editor, I was like, printing one off, putting the folder on. This folder's pretty thick, I got to do something with this. And I just kind of was like, death penalty. I'm going to Google some death penalty. And it was like September 28th or, something like that. And I Googled and I was like, oh, wouldn't you know it? October is Death Penalty Awareness Month. And I count through and I kind of do some sorting. I'm like, I've got 31 banger articles here. So I went and photocopied them all and then photocopied the photocopies and then photocopied. So they all had this kind of same patina to them, and photocopied them all on these, on this kind of natural cream colored paper. And I had all these envelopes I had bought at Aaron's Office Supplies when they went out of business. And they had this gold leaf on them and they said, a gift for you. And so every day in the month of October, well, the first day, October 1st, what Jim Keel and Aurora got in the mail was this envelope said, a gift for you. His name printed, typed out on a typewriter on a label, P.O. Box return address with no name. And it's just his letter to the editor photocopied. And it's stamped with a rubber ink stamp, complimentary. And then the next day, he gets the next article and then the next article. So every single day, and they're all stamped complimentary in the exact same spot on the page. And it just kept sending them every day. And you're picturing what's happening on the other end, where really I'm engaging in discourse. It's like clearly Jim Keel is someone who's like really informed and passionate about capital punishment. Otherwise, he wouldn't have this really well-formed plan and he wouldn't feel compelled to share it with other people. And so it's like, I feel like I want to share with him more information, So it's this benevolent gesture, but it's like so threatening, because there's no context. It's abstract, right? And you just picture like Jim Keel's partner in life being like, I told you not to write that letter, because the role you're playing is like you're literally the some weirdo out there,
right?
In that instance, and like the goal a little bit is to like, I want to shut that guy down, I want to make it so he never advocates that position again to anybody. I want to win that debate, right? And why it's valid to do that with him is, well, he entered the public square with his advocacy. And so I get to engage, right?
I mean, yeah, I mean, it goes back to, what I was saying. It's like, you got to own the things that you put out there in the world. Right?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
The very last one, the one postmarked Halloween, came back in the mail and written an ink pen on it just said, "Return to sender."
Oh man, that is so incredibly brilliant.
So did that PO box? Was that a PO box that you had? Yeah. So
I
did you
get a long time
mail
ago to maintain a PO box?
Okay. Yeah. So did you get mail back from him, or just that one letter?
Just that return to sender.
Okay. That's brilliant.
He didn't want to debate,
So in my mind, after about like 10 days, the conversation around the house or at the dinner table becomes incredibly intense. And then Capital Punishment Awareness Month, that's what it was called, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Becomes No Sex Month for this dude, right?
Yeah.
Potentially the rest of the year.
Yeah, right. Depending on how it all rolled.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Man.
Yeah. So, when I was younger, I did some stuff like that was just to actual random individuals. And I got spanked pretty hard on that, where I realized how unethical that is. And so now I'm very judicious about who I engage with. Like they have to be they have to be putting themselves out there. They have to kind of show up on your doorstep somehow through some effort of their own in order for you to kind of show up on theirs. Yeah.
There has to be some integrity and some ethics involved, right?
Yeah.
That all has to come into play.
Yeah. I mean, there are artists in the milieu of like culture jamming and kind of like gonzo 80s and 90s performance that are well outside of that paradigm of ethics. But,
it's not the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
Right. We live in a totally different time.
Yeah.
I'm not them,
Yeah.
Like Joe Coleman is one, if anyone wants to do some Googling.
Yeah.
He did a couple of events where he staged being a suicide bomber with light explosives. So he really lit up.
Oh my God.
But then just left and got in his car and went away, and he's the kind of person who's like a very disturbed individual from past events in his life. And that's his way of excising that. And it's kind of or like Hermann Nietzsche, the German performance artist, where they would, they'd actually ask for volunteers and they'd crucify them, like full on nails to the hands and feet. Dismember animal, dark stuff, where it's like really getting into the dark side of humanity or Dionysian rites or like black magic type of stuff.
Yeah, don't Google it.
Yeah, don't Google Hermann Nietzsche, right?
Okay, I'm gonna try. I'm writing this shit down, so I'm taking him off.
Right.
I'm taking him off.
A lot of that stuff was part of my
education.
Yeah. Hello, it's Todd Pearson. Happy fall to everyone. Wes and I want to acknowledge our media sponsor, New Magazine. That's NUE. You can follow both the national and the Denver edition of New Magazine on their Instagrams. The national edition can be found at new_magazine and the Denver edition at new_Denver_magazine. Look to New for compelling stories from the world of art and fashion. And we want to mention 2 New Denver Magazine events coming up November 12th and 13th. November 12th is the New Denver Pret-a-Porter Fashion Show, and November 13th is the New Denver Sustainable Fashion Show. Both shows take place at 1899 Wynkoop Street here in Denver. For tickets, go to New Denver's Instagram and click on the Eventbrite link in their bio. Hope to see you there, and thanks for listening.
I'm Peter.
And I'm Heather.
And you're listening to the Tenant Podcast.
I want to circle back to the whole Institute of Sociometry And I would imagine that you have quite a collective of people, but are there any kind of membership qualifications? I would imagine not, but.
Well, yes, but the bar is really quite low. So, the official count is we say that we have over 700 registered agents, not necessarily active or continuously active agents across 23 countries. The barrier to entry is simply share your mailing address with us, and we will send you a special agent initiation kit. So once you've received your special agent credentials, and many agents do choose to select their own agent name, right? So, Peter is Agent Miles. I'm Agent Miss Is. So is in the Institute of Sociometry. And yeah, that's really it. The way that agents are able to participate, most meaningfully is at these fairs. So again, it's really kind of like a cornerstone of being part of this collective is, participating in the fair in some way. So some people, put together trifold to produce a film. Some people just show up, right? So there are a number of agents who, don't identify as artists. And actually really haven't been super, super interested in putting together any kind of trifold or anything like that. But they just kind of they like to come for the show, right? Or to be part of it. And that's not something we turn away.
Yeah. I've kind of somewhat limited it in the last 5 years to people who share their address by mailing something homemade to our PO box, which is 9542 Denver, Colorado 80209. And I'll get things. My PO box and the is PO box and the Institute of Sociometry has been floating around in mail art circles for a long time. And I'll get stuff in the mail on a fairly regular basis that I don't have any context for. I don't know who the person is. I've never heard of them, but a cool little postcard collage. Mm-hmm. And I'll
we'll get prints.
Get prints. Yeah. And they get a special agent starter kit back in the mail. Usually throw in a zine.
Yeah. We got sunflower seeds last spring, which were really beautiful. They were gorgeous sunflowers this summer. So thanks to whoever sent those.
Yeah. Yeah. So I feel like people have to be able to make an effort to start an exchange.
Yeah.
And the mail is becoming an increasingly higher bar of entry because it's so opaque and mysterious to the youth. Right. Actually did a little explainer the other day on my Instagram of the mail. So, went up to one of the blue boxes and I had the Is Fair postcards and I was doing a reel on my Instagram for the youngs. And I was like, hey, there's this thing. It's like a social network for physical objects. It's called the mail. And you need a stamp. It's this little graphic right here. And it costs money. You get it here and you pan up at a post office. You've seen them around. They usually have American flags out front. That's a tip off. And then these blue boxes, which contrary to popular belief are not dog poop receptacles, are for this physical object. I put it in there and they will take it with their hands to that person, even if they live in another country, and hand it to them. So, I think maybe it's that tends to skew a little older. We do have some younger people in the fair this time, people in their early 20s.
I would say the biggest barrier isn't just the mail, but 9 times out of 10, people are interested, and then you tell them a little bit more, and they're not interested.
Yeah, they're just what? What is it again?
And again, you get that I'm gonna walk backwards, at a pretty good clip.
Yeah, but an example of something that is somebody totally getting it, even who's not an artist or doesn't self-identify as an artist. So a friend of mine I used to work with 20 years ago, his wife responded to the call for entries. She's on our email list. Mm-hmm. And she's like, hey, I spin yarn on a traditional loom out of trash that I find, plastic bottles, dryer lint, And it's like this sustainable practice. And I have all these like opinions about big fiber, and the yarn conglomerates and how we really need to be producing our own clothing. Would something like that work? And it's just like, heck yeah, that is so up our alley. Like, that's really interesting. Like, I had no idea, and, so she's going to put together a display. Tammy Riddle is her name.
Mm-hmm.
And she's super jazzed to be part of something like this, that's like a bunch of artists, creative people doing stuff, because she's a really creative person. How else would she be engaged in her project? Just because she doesn't think of herself as a visual artist, or maybe even doesn't have the context to think of herself as a contemporary artist, which I think we could argue she is kind of a conceptual contemporary artist. There's an open door for her to participate in something like this. Like our friend Jim, who we mentioned a couple of times, he's a provocateur. He's like a libertarian, contrarian provocateur. And then
I always joke, he's a carpenter, and I'm like, I asked him a long time ago when I met him, like, Jim, do you whittle? And then I came to realize, like, yes, but he whittles on people. But,
oh my God, I love that.
He's a childhood friend of mine, so we go way back, but enough time of him being engaged in projects with me where I'm like, I've got an idea for something crazy. I need another person. He's the only person like willing to step up to it, where he just kind of realized, and I mentioned he's in Mensa. He's a smart guy. He realized it's like, oh no, this is what I do, what I've been doing. I didn't know it, but what I've been doing this whole time is performance art, like in a contemporary context, non-theatrical, publicly engaging. And so that's how he identified, if someone asks him, what are you? He's like, well, I do, I'm a carpenter and a handyman. But I do performance art. And he's not, he's not a visual artist. He doesn't paint, he doesn't draw, doesn't collage. He just engages in ways that are unexpected and engender critical thinking, typically, which I think is, I think that's really interesting, that you can create a kind of system of access to art where people who aren't trained as artists, don't self-identify as artists, can recognize that it's a method that they can, or maybe even already do, deploy.
I'd like to meet this guy, actually. I'd like to see him in action.
He'll be at the fair, I think, right?
Yeah, he's got a project.
Yeah.
He's gonna, it might change, but he said it's gonna have something to do with just maintaining his health and safety the whole time. And so, he's gonna maybe be wearing a full like Tyvek suit and maintain social distance from everyone at all times and sanitize everything at all times and ask anyone who wants to talk to him what their vaccination status is and if you can see their vaccination card. He's a rural Wyoming libertarian, so you can probably guess where he's coming from with this, but, done in a way that's kind of like odd, thought-provoking, funny,
Outside of these fairs that you put on, do you put on other events, either on a regular or irregular basis?
I mean, we participate in, exhibitions and other events. Usually they're not things that we're putting on, but things that we're invited to be part of. So, for example, Pete and I in 2020 were part of a group exhibition at MCA Denver called Citizenship, a Practice of Society. It was curated by Zoe Larkins. So, that the project that we'd shown in that exhibition was actually an Institute of Sociometry project, kind of a long running one, leftist leaflets in little libraries. So we do those sorts of things. What else?
Lots of, a lot of what we do that's narrative based ends up in zines and books that we make because, we're printmakers and designers kind of by trade. So we do a lot of zine fests and art book fairs because that's kind of the most immediate way to get our work into people's hands for like a relatively cheap price. And it's kind of sustains the studio so that, we're like a kind of self-funding business through the sale of like art books and zines.
Yeah.
So event wise, we do a lot of that kind of stuff. And then we'll do kind of, I mean, I wouldn't really call them performance, but like talks.
Yeah, or like readings. You
Yeah.
know, I think when you write, zines, write stories, kind of work in this way, you end up collecting a lot of stories. And when people are interested, right, and give you the time and space, it's a really good form to, like this, go into detail of like, well, why are you doing this? And what was really happening? And kind of that like inside scoop.
Yeah. And Heather, through, going back to school and getting her MFA, SVA, I think you're getting more interested in like above board curation in like proper art spaces.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely kind of par for the course when you decide to do something like that with your life is, there's certainly a lot of, legitimate avenues to show your work. And so, those are things that I'm interested in as well, obviously.
Yeah.
So your thought process in going through this MFA program is evolving as it well should, and you're kind of starting to think in other avenues, other directions.
Yeah, I mean, I think to be a little like glib, right? One of the reasons why one as an adult after being, I've been out of school now for about 15 years, why would you go back? Sort of the first layer there is you get to a point maybe with whatever it is that you're doing at that time where you're like, no, I would actually gladly spend $50,000 a year to not be doing this job or to not be doing this thing just to get like a little bit of a break. And so, of course, that's really facetious, but I think there's a little bit of truth to that. So, for me, the goal of doing something like this is less that I have a specific, discrete, like professional goal in mind, right? Like, it's not that I expect to emerge from this program, with blue chip gallery representation. Although, of course, if that's something that happens, that would be a real interesting story. But I mean, I think really like the goal of an MFA program is you go into it, I think, really motivated to get everything that you can out of it, read everything that they give you, listen to everything that people have to say about your work, because it's one of the few times in your life you're going to have that many people care about what it is that you're doing. And it also gives you the time and space to do the things that you maybe can't do when you're trying to like shoehorn 20 minutes of art making into a day that involves waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning, working out, going to work, coming home, grocery shopping, cooking dinner, calling a friend. It's pressing pause on that a little bit and being really intentional about like, I'm going to spend some time making things that I'm not really sure I understand what I'm doing yet, but the only way I'm going to get through it is by doing this.
For me, and I think for both of us, getting invited to the MCA exhibition was like a little bit of a wake up.
Yeah.
Because for me, coming from a kind of DIY or die kind of ethos where you just kind of make your own opportunities, having an opportunity like that kind of makes you realize that there's a chance that the milieu of work that you've been engaged in for the last couple of decades maybe has matured to the extent that there's interest in it from like institutions, and that the goal, I think, always is to get the work out in front of people. And, if you're seeking a voice, it's great to have an audience. And if it's in a venue like that, you're reaching a much wider audience than you can through your own grassroots kind of like mailing list, your scene, like thousands of people would go through that don't have any expectation of what they're going to see. And that's kind of exciting and interesting. And it was also, I think, kind of concurrent with the two of us really making an effort to more professionalize what we're doing.
Yeah. Well, and, the other one last thing too, it's, worth mentioning is it's just a sincere desire to get better at what I do, right? I think there's always room to grow and mature your art practice. There's always room to evolve as an artist, to get better at your craft, to just kind of push yourself, right? What better reason to go back to school than to learn?
Yeah.
And it's always nice to be able to share what you do with a larger audience, right? Have a larger conversation, be part of that conversation or a different conversation than what you're typically used to functioning within.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me too, going to school, somewhere that is really different, far away from Denver. I've lived in Denver now 11 years and have been making work here. Like, it made me realize, I kind of do live in this bubble, and there are a lot of other things going on. And just even the people in my cohort are extremely diverse and are from different parts of the world. And it's great to just be reminded that there's just this incredible amount of diversity that's out there. But there's people all over the place who are making really awesome art.
Going back to the Institute, do you kind of know, or is there kind of a cutoff with age group as far as what is the range of ages that participate in the Institute? And then you kind of alluded before when you were talking about the whole, male thing that, that some of the younger folks might not be quite into it or quite understand as much.
Well, I think just some people who spring to mind that are in this current fair, Jay is probably the elder. I don't know how old he is, but
yeah, I mean, there's this disaffected kind of Gen X 90s old guard.
That's
right?
That's the center.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, because if you think back to, this started in 1995, the first fair is in 96. These are people who have been doing it for a long time. It's interesting, I think my coming in sort of halfway through, I'm a little bit younger than Pete, kind of bringing in people who were children when that was going on, so have some kind of memory of it, but then are, interested in sort of bringing their own spin. And I would say that really the younger participants are almost exclusively coming from, your body of students or, other participants who, maybe back in 1996 were just, some kind of DIY grunge punk, male artists, but, now a lot of them have, gone back to school, gotten their MFAs and are now, professors of art and are funneling those students and those young people to this kind of work. And it's interesting. We had mentioned, one of the forums for our work are these kind of zine and art book fairs, right? And people are often kind of surprised when they hear that. They're like, really? People are still doing that? Gosh, I thought zines kind of were done in the 90s. There's been this really amazing resurgence among young people wanting to make their own books and zines. I'm not 100% sure, what it really means. My opinion is I think it's kind of this reaction against the post-information cacophony of the internet. And, in a way, actually going back to, making your own book and then handing it to someone is like one of the more pure or truer forms of communication available now. But that's been a really great place to recruit agents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think, Jay Critchley, he's probably in his late 60s, early 70s. And then there's two people who spring to mind, Curtis Tucker and Aniston Craddock, who graduated within the last year from college as traditional college students and are out there like in their first jobs. So no teens or children that I know of.
Yeah.
Not like in LA where the 7-year-old showed up with a diorama unannounced.
Usually
might get that, but
teens or children are usually the, kind of unwitting child of an agent who's like being kind of dragged into going to this thing.
Yeah. We have an agent who's doesn't have anything in the fair, but she's somewhat active, who I think is 20, and she's a life agent. She was one of the newborns of one of the very first agents back in the mid 90s. And she got her agent starter kit in the crib, and she's still involved to some extent. So.
And how many people of that original group at the beginning of all this, how many would you say are still active and involved?
Oh, probably between a dozen and 20. Not that many are in this fair, but they are still in communication. It's somewhat of a friend group in addition to, in terms of like the people who were around in the 90s when it was started. So they're around. They still have their own practices that are kind of in a similar vein, just being a product of the time and place. Same education is the one that kind of spawned the Institute. In the fair, there are probably 4 or 5 people who have been with it since the 90s that have work in the fair. And then probably a larger bubble of people who have been engaged in it over the last 20 years. In the early 90s, there was, when you have the type of diaspora you have of your friends after college, it was a lot harder to keep in touch with people, like very little internet, no social media.
Facebook obviously didn't exist.
Right. So like mid-aughts to now, I think there's a good cohort of people who kind of stay more active. But it's the kind of thing that you drift into and out of over time, I think,
Depending on what's going on, in your life.
Yeah. Yep.
And then you talked just a little bit about it, but talk about ISPress.
Do you want to take that?
Sure. Yeah. So ISPress is, we say, the publishing arm of the Institute of Sociometry. So ISPress is something that loosely started around 2015. And the first publication was this art annual, right? Or we at the time called it a luxury zine because it was perfect bound and had screen print and letterpress print covers. It was called Raw Fury. And really the focus was exploring kind of the street art scene of what we consider the cultural bookends of the Midwest, Chicago and Denver. So there's obviously a lot of art publications that focus on, cities like New York or LA, but what's going on in the middle of the country. That was loosely the focus. So we produced that and then are sitting on 250 copies of it that we split with the co-editor, Eric Von Haynes, who's amazing printer and artist out of Chicago, runs Flatlands Press. So shout out to Eric there. We're like, what do we do with this stuff? So that's where we really got into doing these art book fairs, zine fests. I think one of the first ones that we had done was DINK in Denver. So that's the Denver Independent Comic Fest. So the acronym doesn't quite align with the name of the festival. And, from there, it started kind of picking up, like this realization of we both made zines when we were teenagers. You made zines when you were in your undergrad.
Yeah, I worked as a professional printer for like a decade.
I'm a graphic designer. We're just like, this is really fun, but then also realizing there's something about the way that we work and many of the projects that we do that are conducive to this format, because it's a great way to document these interventions in public space or to document a performance, and to also then tell the story too, right? Sometimes like having photo documentation of something on a wall, it doesn't really cut it, you know what I mean? So that got us interested in publishing more titles, and so it sort of just snowballed from there. So Raw Fury, was happening every year. We had done 5 editions of that. Now it's on a little bit of a hiatus to sort of retool what the focus is. But in those intervening years, we've, Pete's published, I think 6 or 7 different titles. I've published 4. We published for other artists. So Pete's had this long relationship with Denver artist Frank Kwiatkowski, who's really incredible. He is the original cone cut printer. So Frank will take traffic cones, cut them open, flatten them out, create and produce these absolutely wonderful carvings in them, and then print those, and we paste them up around town. So, Pete's worked with him to put those in print.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know. You have anything to add there?
Yeah, I think lately we've started helping other people kind of realize their projects in that medium. So consulting with people, publishing zines, printing zines for them, or whatever part of it they can't do themselves, but still treating it kind of like their DIY project and just kind of coming in as someone to help. And, we charge people for that, but in a way it's much more cheap and accessible and handholdy than going to, the competition for make 50 copies of your zine is
blurb books
or FedEx Office.
Yeah.
And those two enterprises are kind of remote and hard to access and expensive for people who don't have a lot of print or design skills. And those have been some really interesting projects, and those have helped us with our goal of just being more self-sustaining in our like studio practice, and kind of funded some other projects, so that when we're like, hey, so the bill for those mom hooded t-shirts and pink polos is going to be like $650, so that we can take them to the park and give them away for free. Like we have that money in the bank account because we just printed like 4 or 5 zine runs for other people around town. So it's a really good kind of symbiotic relationship, and it's a way to a little bit move beyond the collective and somewhat dispersed and somewhat non-existent nature of the Institute of Sociometry, which is really always has been intended to be and probably should remain a completely non-commercial conceptual project, and think about a more personal project or a partnership in which we can use our marketable skills of like design and printing to help other people, but kind of feed back in to the Institute of Sociometry, and then publish some of the more kind of esoteric or weird or unmarketable works that we come up with, or like experimental stuff where there's not really a concern if there's an audience for it when you're making it. So it's a kind of existing in a truer more pure art space. Mm-hmm. Plus we moved into this house we're in 5 years ago, and it had a rickety carriage house. This house used to be owned by Gary Lee Bomar, who owned Gary Lee's on Broadway.
Okay.
Yeah, and was a bartender at Skylark.
Skylark. And he had passed away fairly young from an accident. And he was an artist in pinstriped cars back in the carriage house. And so we thought, we've always wanted an actual studio. And at that time, we owned a printing press. And, we didn't have anywhere to park it but this rickety carriage house
with the dirt floor. And
lucky for us, we know a genius carpenter. So
right.
Jim came down from Wyoming and kind of crashed out with us for about 8 months, maybe.
No, it was 3 months.
Okay.
Yeah, it felt a lot longer than it actually.
And he did an amazing job building out the space. And we sold our press and got a better press. We got a second press. We got a giant cutter. So we started accumulating stuff now that we felt really kind of like grounded to the space. And to, I think for years and years and years, we were more conceptual in our practice, partly because we didn't have studios.
Yeah.
And so, your studio is a laptop on the kitchen table, So having the space has kind of made us understand how we could work in a way that is more oriented around like physical, tactile objects, is more oriented around like commodities, like books.
Or it's just more material.
Collages,
right?
Yeah, more material.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, it's taking the art practice you and I both have and kind of bringing it back in a way to actually physically making art, right? Like sometimes I think the both of us have this tendency to get so in our own heads and so into the idea, and you forget this other component of art making, which is, the physical work, the visceral experience of seeing and beholding this work in physical space. So that's been kind of nice to actually be able to make something. Yeah.
And I'm really influenced by, I've mentioned it multiple times so far, but DIY, coming from like the kind of punk and skateboard scene of the 90s. So the example being like the band Fugazi, where they're going to carry their own gear, drive their own van, but they're also going to produce their own record. They're going to own their own record label. They're going to put those records in envelopes and mail them to people themselves. So it's not just creating the content, but owning the means of production, owning the means of distribution is part of doing it yourself. And in order to do that, you have to acquire a lot of different skills. And, part of it is having some business sense or running a business, like Discord Records that was founded by the members of Fugazi. It's a business, so they might be anarchists and old crusty punks, but they still have to think about how are we going to keep these people employed? How are we going to keep this project going?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's back to what we were talking about at the top of this conversation of, are you too organized? Do you plan what it is that you do? It's like, absolutely. Yeah.
So I seen you look like you had an old Kluge. Is that a Kluge press that you're running, or
it's a Chandler and Price Craftsman that has a Kluge feeder bolted to the front of it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I come from the printing industry as well, but more the commercial side. So I'm always intrigued by the old Kluges and windmills that are out there. Those Heidelberg windmills just look scary to run. So,
oh yeah. They're actually less scary than the Craftsman, because we took the feeder off it because it was a little too complex for us and wasn't operating, and it's all hand fed. So
it's like a little too much of a reach.
You're sticking your hand in the hand crusher, like once every 2 seconds to place the paper. But yeah, being printmakers, I mean, when we met in Chicago, it was in a printmaking class.
Yeah.
So, that's something we're interested in. I kind of see it as like a skill or a craft that informs the work product of more conceptual projects. And then by trade, being a designer and printer, that as well is just like an avenue by which more conceptual things can get baked down into like a coherent narrative that has some ability to be distributed.
Mm.
And so what kind of services do you offer for people that are interested in doing their own zine or what have you, or own publication?
So we always will consult with someone to figure out what it is exactly that they do, but really what we're able to offer is design. So if that's not a skill this person is bringing to the table, we're able to design a publication for them. We have done some publications where we've offered, proofing and copy editing. So there have been a couple of projects more recently that have been more text-based. But then the actual print production. So unless you've done it, it's easy to dismiss as something that's like, oh, you just send it to a printer. Like, that's easy. It's like and Wes is like nodding his head. There's like a lot of coordination and consideration that goes into that too, especially, it's like, do you want a letterpress printed cover? What kind of paper stock do you want on the cover? What do you want the guts to look like? What's your budget? Can you print this full color?
Do you want a hand-sewn binding or staples? Yeah.
So just helping people navigate all those things and then actually making that file work to where if we are working with the printer, sometimes we do, outsource aspects of the project, like printing the book guts with a commercial, to a commercial printer as a much better laser printer than we do, getting them on board with what's happening, or we're saying like, okay, so we want this, but then when it goes to the bindery, we want to insert these 10 sheets of different stock at this page. Like, are you able to collate that? So
speaking their language.
Right. So that's a lot of, I would say that's a service in and of itself that not a lot of people know how to do.
And then also kind of plussing up the service in the sense of, we always will like pre-flight something, like run it through a bunch of specs to make sure it's good and like report back to the person so that they're not disappointed with the end result. And, I'll say something like, hey, I'll charge you like $30 to pre-flight this, but for $60, I'll spend an hour with you and teach you how to do it so that you know how to do it forever thereafter. And as someone who's taught print production for the last 14 years at the university, it's like, I've got it down, so I can like spend a really focused hour with like demo materials and record it. Like sometimes we'll do it in person, but sometimes we'll do it like on Zoom and record it and give them a video of it so that they know how to do it forever thereafter. So it's like empowering people, which partially just kind of like helps the culture stay fresh, and helps bring new people into it, giving them skills they don't have. I teamed up with a guy, Robert Baranko, who's like a itinerant BMX rider who has photos from around the world from extensive traveling he's done. He wanted to put out a photo book. And just as an example, and he's like, he kind of wanted to do as much of it as possible himself. And so I spent I had a 2-hour, he just cold called me and he's like, hey, I like your Instagram. I want to make a photo book. Like, how does it work? And I described to him for like an hour and a half on the phone how to use InDesign and make a grid and basic design principles. And I was like, work with that. And when you hit a roadblock, I'm happy to help. call me up. And at that point, maybe I'll charge you for this phone call we just had, or maybe not. I don't know. We'll see. And got off the phone. And then like 13 months later, I get this phone call. It's like, hey, it's Robert. I finished laying out the book and I'm stuck now. And it's like, I had no idea this guy was going to call me back. And he and I have gone on this like incredible journey together where he was like, I want a hardbound, like signature sewn book. And I was like, okay, well, it's like, I'm not doing that in my garage, like in my garage. We got to find someone to do that. And he's like, and I want 100 copies. And I'm like, okay, this is like, let me explain something about printing. Do you want to pay $90 a copy, for your book? He's like, no, I was like, well, because you're only going to be able to sell them for like $45 max. Like go to the tattered cover, start looking at photo books. They cost $40, $45. He's like, how is that possible? It's like, well, volume, you have 15, 20,000 people want your book. The printer charges you less per unit, but every single one of those books at tattered cover, open it up and on the first page, it'll say where it's printed, and 100% of them are printed in China, because of like labor costs, cost of materials. He's like, well, why don't we get my book printed in China? And it's like, dude, I don't know any printers in China. And he's like, well, I work for this t-shirt company. We get our shirts printed in China. Maybe they'll do it. And I was like, call them up. And lo and behold, he finds some printer in China that he's now got 500 books on a pallet sitting on a ship, waiting for its turn outside of the port of Long Beach.
It's like stuck in the port of Savannah.
A year and a half later.
Right.
And that was really cool. It was a real learning experience for me because I don't think I would have ever gone that route. But it was really cool getting to know like this customer service person in China and like how they work their process. And as someone who's been a professional printer, as kind of a print nerd, it's just cool to kind of like talk to other print nerds in another country, and see how they do it and like what their concerns are. And then like learning about shipping that stuff, which is a whole project in and of itself. But also with Robert, it was just like, we're kind of in it together. It's like, it's his project. It's his book. He designed it. I kind of made it, tightened it up. I found a copy editor for him. I typeset it because his typesetting skills were terrible. No offense, Robert, if you listen to this, but like, and I came up with a price for him. It was probably not enough based on how much time I spent, but I got invested in it. I'm like, dude, I want to, this is a cool project. Mm-hmm. And at some point I was like, hey man, you used up the quote I gave you, like I'm going to have to start charging you like by the hour for, but I'll let you know. And he's like, yeah, no, that's cool. But, he ended up getting, I haven't seen him yet, fingers crossed.
Still stuck somewhere.
He ended up getting a really screaming deal on these books, but it was still a really good, fair price for the people in China. And, it's something he did himself. It's cool. When you open it up, it says, published by Robert Barenko, so he's just like when you Google this guy, the thing that pops up on Google is Robert Barenko, homeless BMX legend. And it's like, now he's a publisher and he published a 420-page hardcover photo book.
Wow.
Wow.
That's huge.
Yeah,
so kind of like
that's substantial.
Working with people and empowering them to kind of realize something they wanted to do in print form, I think is really cool. It's fun.
Yeah,
that is cool.
Yeah. And I bet it turns out great because, those guys they're professional just like anywhere else, and the benefit they have is cheap labor and probably cheaper products than we have here. Yep, so they can do it. Yeah. The distribution thing, I'm in ad specialties. And the distribution thing is just a nightmare right now. Yeah, it's just crazy. Yeah.
What's funny about Robert is that he's constantly like, he wanted 100 books because he's got like 100 friends, and then they're like, well, our minimum's like 300, and he's like, oh, that's a lot of books. And I'm like, yeah, it is. It's like a huge pallet of books that's going to be in your living room in Boulder, and he's like, I don't know what I'm going to do with those, but he's got 110,000 Instagram followers and he's got a YouTube video with like over 2 million views. And I'm like, dude, I'll make you a mock-up of this book and you just put it on your Instagram. And then however many likes you get, you like divide by 5. And that's how many people are going to buy your book. Like you could do way more than 300 books. In fact, you shouldn't be talking to me. You should have gone to some publisher with your photos and showed them your Instagram and your 2.2 million YouTube and be like, I want to make a book, but I also want an advance to travel the world again to make a second book. And he's just like, this guy's kind of so pure in his thinking. He's like, oh, wow, I never thought of that. It's just like, you got to capitalize on this stuff, you want to get your
awesome.
book out. But yeah.
We're going to start wrapping this up, but why we really are here to talk today is about the fair. And so I want you to tell everyone when this is happening exactly and where they can come see it.
So it's at the Globeville EPICenter, which is known colloquially around Denver as the Globeville Rec. If you're in Denver, it's like you're driving up Washington, you hang a left at the McDonald's right before you go underneath I-25, I-70. You're driving towards I-25 down kind of a strip of, working class houses. And there's basically two businesses on that street, Greene Bar, and then across the street is the Rec Center. And the Rec Center itself is really cool. I got to give a plug for Birdseed Collective. Birdseed Collective, I'm not sure exactly how they acquired it. I think the city turned over the lease to them. So the Rec Center is a traditional kind of like 1960s rec center with a gymnasium and a wrestling room. And Birdseed Collective, which is a great mission-driven arts nonprofit in town, took it over. They had a who's who of the best street artists and muralists come in and paint the inside. So there's incredible murals in there around the edge of the basketball court. Mm-hmm. So the exhibition is at the Rec Center. Mm-hmm. It's free. We're going to have an opening on Thursday, 11/11, which is the traditional date of the Sociometry Fair kickoff, from 6 to 9. And then Friday, we'll have some open hours. And then Friday evening, across the street at Fort Greene is a screening that's curated by Collective Misnomer, who is Adon De La Garza. So he's putting together a roster of kind of like experimental film shorts. Saturday and Sunday open essentially afternoon hours, like noon to 6. And then Sunday, we're having another screening that's kind of is agent work. That's going to be more of a matinee. So it's going to start at 4:00 and go until about 6 when the whole thing wraps up.
So just to summarize that, is Fair 2020, 2021 happening Thursday, November 11th through Sunday, November 14th at the Globeville Rec Center or the EPICenter, which is at 4496 Grant Street in Denver, Colorado. We'll open Thursday evening, starting at 4:00. And then over the weekend, we'll have afternoon hours between 12 and 6. Be sure to catch out both of our film screenings. First on Friday night, Collective Misnomer at Greene Bar. And then Sunday afternoon, also at Greene Bar, a selection of film shorts by Is Agents.
Yeah. And just to remind Heather that unfortunately she and I will be there at 4, but we're opening at 6 on Thursday. And ispress.co, so CO, no M, is where you can go for the full schedule. There's an Is Fair tab on the top of the website. And we've got the address of Fort Greene and the Rec Center on there. And then we have a schedule of events. There's also going to be a couple performances interspersed with the screenings and at the Rec Center. And then also Anthony Camera is going to do his bizarre portrait parade on Saturday afternoon that he usually does at Vertigo Gallery on First Fridays. Yeah, so we'll be there the whole time.
Come say hi.
Right. As Todd and Wes mentioned at the top of the podcast, we're both very attractive, long-haired people. So you just got to look for that, right?
and how many artists are involved?
46
or exhibitors, however
total.
Yeah.
So between the exhibition and the screening, well, really, I think 50 actually, because we're not counting everyone in.
There's some ensembles,
collective misnomers, and then we might have some people show up randomly with doing their thing. So
So there's a little fluidity through this whole thing as far as people participate last minute sometimes.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing where if you want to show up in your out of season costume, that's appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, there was a deadline on call for entries for trifolds and videos, but there is no deadline for gorilla performances. So
that's right.
Right on.
I should say that Anthony Garcia Sr., who is with Birdseed Collective and kind of like said yes to us using the space, clarified that we only use up to half court on the gym so that kids could still come in and play and shoot hoops, on the other half. So if you're the type of person who really likes on a Saturday afternoon to check out some kooky like culture jamming and then, get a little game of one-on-one going, this is your spot.
I love that. And I love what Birdseed Collective does, all the things that they do in the community. And shout out to Anthony Garcia Sr. and crew and all the things that they facilitate.
Yeah. Yeah, he'd be a great podcast subject.
Been working on it.
Yeah.
That guy's so busy and he has so many irons in the fire. So
eventually. He's a cool dude.
He is a cool dude. Is it one of the stipulations that you have to utilize the whole trifold format? Is that one of the requirements? Are there requirements when it comes to being an exhibitor?
I'd say that's strongly encouraged because we want the overall aesthetic to have that kind of science fair vibe. But
there's other practical reasons as well. So, we've never in all 7 iterations of the fair have ever held it at a gallery or anything even resembling a gallery. So it's really a logistical thing. If somebody sends us some, 3 kind of preciously framed triptych wall pieces, we're not going to have anywhere to put them, and certainly nowhere to guarantee that they're not going to get messed up or broken or whatever it is. So some of it's just really like the only thing we can guarantee at these things, because they're so DIY, is we got a table. You got something to put on that table.
You also get people like Devin Deku who, through Haley, we don't exactly know what she's doing, but Haley told us these 2 things, which was Devin's going to bring her own table. So don't worry about that. And then she's going to have some really luxurious, professionally prepared French dessert that we're welcome to eat, and it'll be replenished continuously. And then we were also asked if there's room out front to park an Airstream. So that's maybe a little getting away from the trifold, but you don't say no to that, right?
No, definitely not.
And I'm also on my now 3rd box that's arrived in the mail of very interesting and odd and hilarious, but loose leafed stuff that then I get to deploy my design and collage skills and jam out a trifold for somebody. Yeah,
the next week of Pete and I's life is just going to be some trifold making all-nighters, I have a feeling.
Have you seen a lot of the work that's going to be there? Okay. And is it in your possession, or these folks show up with it and set it up?
It's cat herding, but a lot of it's in our possession.
Yeah. I mean, this year, I think because, of obvious reasons, some people are still unsure about travel. We've had a lot of stuff mailed to us, so we've gotten the opportunity to see, quite a bit of the work just because it's sitting in our studio right now.
Yeah,
and we're really excited about what we're going to show you guys.
And we told people today is the deadline, so that we get 10 things by today, and then the other 40 people are like, "Oh no, I have to really do it now."
Right. Oh my God, yes.
But I've actually learned quite a bit from Haley and Heather both about curation and keeping on people, and you shouldn't have the expectation everything comes in on the deadline, but you should send out the email reminding them when the deadline is.
Without giving too much away, what can people kind of expect to experience when they come to the IS Fair?
Well, a lot of people, maybe they're going to go into a neighborhood that they haven't spent a lot of time in. So that's always good for us. We always look for spaces in interesting places. So Globeville is kind of a buried treasure, literally in a sense, underneath I-25 and I-70. You're going to see a lot of cool murals inside of the rec center. And then you'll walk in and you'll have like a half court, well, basketball gymnasium, half court of which will probably have some neighborhood kids shooting hoops. And then behind that will be something that looks kind of like your junior high science fair, draped tables.
But upon closer inspection, this is probably going to be one of the most bizarre and artfully crafted science fairs that you've ever been in your life. So, participants can expect to be immersed in at least one highly specific, strange, bizarre, and beautiful world that artist has crafted through their trifold. You can expect to have these amazing one-on-one conversations with other like-minded adults, artists, makers, thinkers, whoever they want to define themselves. And you can expect to have a really fun time if you want to kind of continue to keep the party going with us over at Fort Greene, see some amazing film shorts, come back every day of the week because there's going to be different stuff.
Yeah, for the film screening, so like what's kind of headlining the Is Agent screening is a 20-minute film by PJ Raval, who's an Austin-based award-winning documentary maker. His documentary is called Come and Take It, and it's about the Cox Not Glocks protest that went down at the University of Texas a couple of years ago, where in response to repealing any open carry restrictions on campus, a bunch of student activists and feminists decided that really everybody should just carry giant dildos around instead, and formulated the entire protest around that.
You can also expect to see some work from my MFA program colleague, Janine Brown. She's this wonderful artist who is from Connecticut. So over the past few months, she's been interviewing various people on camera, having them say a series of I am statements that they've selected. So it's like being invited into watching someone give themselves a mantra in the mirror of repeating all of these different aspects of themselves. So that's going to be, I think, a really wonderful highlight from the film screening. Gosh,
yeah,
what else?
That'll be actually the screening on Sunday will be kicked off by Toby Fike and a group of RimCAD students doing a performance. So we're excited about that. And I think, yeah, I mean, if you like to go to openings, Thursday's great. If you like screenings, Friday, which is the screening will be 6 o'clock on, really only for about an hour. Saturday is great if you want to get your bizarre portrait taken by Anthony. And then Sunday is kind of cool because we'll have both spaces active at the same time, the exhibition and a screening across the street at Fort Greene. So I think that would be a great time also. And then, in addition to the event being free, we'll have like a lot of freebies and like weird little trinkets. And then we'll have a merch table with zines and books and DVDs and swag from a lot of the artists for really cheap. And 100% of that money is going to go to those artists.
Fantastic. And this is the 7th one. When was the last time it was here in Denver?
2020. It was at Society, which is now Plinth Gallery.
You said 2020.
Oh, sorry, 2000, 20 years ago.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
Feels like it was just yesterday.
On Brighton Boulevard in a kind of a warehouse DIY space called Society.
Yeah.
Well, this is cool.
The filling station bar was across the street.
Wow. Well, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Really looking forward to it. And I definitely would love to come every day if I'm able to.
Yeah.
Wes may be traveling back through town, so hopefully he can join me.
I'll be on my way back from Arizona. So if timing works out, I'll swing on by.
Awesome.
I just don't know what day I'm going to be coming through Denver. So, but yeah,
Very
it's
cool.
right in that zone though.
Yeah.
Anything else that you want to tell our listeners about the fair, or anything else you want to talk about that you might have coming up or you want to mention that we didn't cover?
I mean, I'll give a plug for a solo show I have in March at Dateline Gallery for Month to Print, which is like a different vein of work, still print-based and book-based, but different subject matter. It's called PACT, P-A-C-T, which is a book I've been working on off and on for well, since 1996.
Wow.
Series of books, 2 books and a zine.
Do you want to talk about the Lumpen?
Yeah, we're gonna be part of Lumpen's. Is it 30 years of Lumpen? I think it is.
Yeah.
So Lumpen's a Chicago free cultural magazine, and they have an exhibition at the Chicago Cultural Center that we're gonna have a kind of like mini installation inside of as part of the Info Expo.
So that'll be in January 2022, January being the best month to travel to Chicago. So we're really looking forward to that. And then
I've been in Chicago in January, and I enjoy it.
I did 8 years of hard time there. And then lastly, Pete and I both have a number of publications coming out in the near future. So Lil 3, which chronicles the work that we did for the 2020 exhibition at MCA Denver. So this is doing a very, very in-depth data analysis of all of the people who walked by our little free library full of zines in front of our house to uncover the question of who actually buys or takes these things. And then Lil 4, which is a continuation. So Pete chronicling his experience with the little free library with the banned books.
Yep, in Boomtown. And then I am putting out the third of a series I've been working on for a number of years now called Mismerched, which is documenting the pervasive phenomenon of people who put things back in the wrong place at the grocery store, accompanied by haikus. Because if you pay attention to these things, some of these juxtapositions are beautifully poetic. And then you have your pack book. Yep.
Oh my God. You guys are busy people.
Yeah.
Holy
a lot
crap.
of coffee in this house.
Yeah.
Man, oh man. Well, all of that sounds incredibly fascinating. And if you have particular dates, I'll get those from you and make sure that I put them in the episode notes and direct people. And when it gets closer to some of these events and these shows, if you remind me and shoot me an email, I'll make sure that I push that out on our social media and promote that.
Cool. Yeah,
Awesome.
for sure.
Thank you.
Man, I can't thank you enough for taking a good portion of your Sunday and spending time with us and talk about your work and the fair and the Institute of Sociometry. It's been an absolute pleasure. And you guys are so fun and wonderful to talk to. You're just so full, just a wealth of information and inspiring. I feel very inspired after these few hours that we spent together. So thank you so much.
Oh,
awesome.
Thank you
thank you.
taking time out of your Sunday to listen to us tell these weird stories.
Yeah. And also just really appreciate what you're doing in general. It's really cool to have like a long form podcast that delves really deeply into artists and their practice and their backgrounds. And it's cool for us that you have so many Denver artists in the mix. But I think it really transcends just the space of Denver, because listening to some of your back issues, I was really kind of like intrigued by why people do what they do and where they're coming from and where they're going. So thank you for doing what you do.
And I can't wait to have you guys on again, because like Todd said, this has been a wonderful conversation. And I definitely would love to come sometime when I'm in Denver, come and spend a couple hours with you over a beverage of some sort and just further what I always consider a friendship out of these podcasts. It always feels like I've made a new friend, and this is no exception. And you guys are just wonderful people and had a great time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, you guys will have to check out the studio, pull a print, then have the drink.
There we go.
Yeah,
there we go.
Wes, we'll get you set up with a print run of like 300 on our CNP.
I would love it.
We'll kick back and watch you.
There you go. I would love that. That'd be a blast.
Oh.
Don't wear your good shoes.
Oh, awesome.
Cool.
Again, to our listeners, the Is Fair happens November 11th through the 14th at the Globeville EPICenter, aka Globeville Rec Center, located at 4496 Grant Street, Denver, Colorado 80216. And the Greene Bar is across the street at 321 East 45th Avenue, Denver, Colorado, same zip 80216. You can find out more about the Institute of Sociometry at sociometry.com and about ISPress and information about the IS Fair at ispress.co. And you can follow Peter on Instagram at is.press and Heather on Instagram at Heather Link-Bergman. For the Tenant Podcast, I'm Todd Pearson.
And I'm Wes Brown.
Have a great week.